Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is October 24th, 2022, and we have an epic Mormon Stories podcast for you today. We have with us Jeff and Larissa Kindred. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're excited.
They're here all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. But today's Mormon Stories episode just has so many key central themes that are so crucial to our Mormon Stories audience. We're going to be talking about Larissa growing up as an LDS church member in Utah of Japanese American descent. We're even going to be talking about Topaz and the Japanese concentration camps, around World War II time period, and growing up in a multiracial family in Utah. Jeff has stories about growing up here in Salt Lake City, Brighton High School. He had a grooming scoutmaster. We're going to be talking about that. Jeff played basketball and tennis at the state level here for the Bengals. So that's fun. But we're going to be talking about infertility in marriage, adoption in marriage, multiracial adoption in marriage. Both of them served in high leadership positions, including Relief Society presidencies, bishoprics, and stake high councils. But we're also going to be talking about kind of social awakenings, in the past couple of recent years, becoming awakened to women's issues, to racial issues, to LGBTQ issues and other sorts of issues and how that affected their marriage. We're going to be talking about COVID and cancer and breast cancer. Larissa was diagnosed with breast cancer and had double mastectomy that we'll be talking about. We're going to be talking about sexual dysfunction, the way sometimes Mormonism sets couples up for sexual dysfunction, how they have worked through that. And to boot, they will be talking about having an LGBTQ child and multiracial adoption. And then finally, their faith journey. Holy moly.
Yeah.
It's like you check almost every box.
That was a good teaser for this. So
welcome to Salt Lake City. Welcome back to Utah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on Mormon Stories.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. And we're also thrilled to have Margie in the house as co-host. Margie.
Hello, everyone.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. Well, I read on YouTube or watched on YouTube that jumping into things is the way to do it. So let's jump in.
Okay.
Jeff, where does your Mormon story begin? And if either of you want to start with a disclaimer, sometimes believing family members might get the wrong idea. There's just kind of this uninformed assumption that if you come on Mormon Stories, you're trying to tear down people's faith, or you hate the church, or you want to destroy the church, or whatever, trying to take people out of the church and destroy faith. Do either of you want to start with kind of a disclaimer on why you wanted to come on Mormon Stories?
Well, I would say that the only disclaimer I have is that the purpose of being here is because I think it'll be extremely therapeutic for Larissa and I. I think we have a story that is relatable and will be helpful. And I guess the other thing is we will be vulnerable. This will be getting into issues that of sexuality, sexual dysfunction, and those are things that people might not be people that know me. I know some of my people from work know that I'm coming and they're interested. So it might be too much information for some people. So that's the only disclaimer I have.
Okay. Larissa, anything you want to add?
Maybe just that, I think that as we kind of deconstructed our relationship with the church, I think that we learned to differentiate the system from the people in the church, because as we go through this, we actually have had quite a few positive experiences in the church, and there's people that are really special to us that were part of our church journey, and so but we also feel very strongly about some of the damage that we saw the church do, and so that's I think our approach is that there's a system here that we feel is capable of, creating harm. And that doesn't mean that we feel like the people are doing that. And I know you talk about systems versus people a lot. So, so I would just maybe like to reiterate that.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's an act of courage and vulnerability to come on Mormon Stories. And for many, it's also a big blessing. So we're just so grateful you come all the way from Nashville to be with us.
Yes.
I'm thinking this is going to be probably a 3-parter. So it's going to be many hours and many parts just because there's so much to this story, but let's dive in. So Jeff, where does your Mormon story begin?
So my story begins, I grew up in a family that was LDS. My parents had both been raised LDS. My mom came from a family that was extremely unstable. Both her parents were alcoholics, and I think...
Here in Utah?
Yes, here in Utah. Yeah, she and my dad...
Are there alcoholics in Utah?
Yeah, right. There used to be. I don't think there is anymore. There used to be. Her and my dad both went to Highland High School, and so yeah, I think that played a part in who my mom was, and she, I think, was extremely controlling and overbearing, trying because of her upbringing. My dad grew up in the church. He went through a stint of being less active, but ended up serving a mission. Actually, he served in Elder Holland's mission, and there was another one of the apostles in that same mission too.
So in the UK in the early 60s?
Yeah, England, yep, London.
That was your dad?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Quentin Cook was in that
Quentin
mission.
Cook, yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, Quentin Cook.
Marion D. Hanks,
was his mission president, yes.
And that was the baseball baptisms era. You know anything about that?
He didn't ever say anything about that.
Have you heard of
No,
it?
he didn't. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I know all
yeah.
about it. Yeah, but
Okay.
I did not ever hear that from him,
Cool.
that was going on. But so my family growing up, I would say we went in and out of how hard we were going with Mormonism. I mean, there were times when I feel like that my parents would try and double down and they'd get us all up early morning. It never stuck. I think every time we tried to do scripture study, it would end up in fights or people sleeping and family home evening, the same thing. I think every family home evening we had always ended up in people fighting or someone running off crying. It was just that's my memories of those two things. But my parents did try to do that. I do have a memory of my dad every morning, probably my entire life, reading his scriptures in the morning. I mean, that's just something he did like religiously, all of the time. And so that was that. Growing up, I think I always was, my mom would tell me that I was always faithful from the beginning. I always had a lot of faith, I guess is what she would say. So I never doubted the church. I remember when we moved from Sandy over to Cottonwood Heights, and I was so stressed out because, you get up in church and say, I know this church is true, and asking my mom, well, are we still going to go to that church? What about this? Like, we're going to a new church. And to me, that was like really disconcerting that what about this church isn't true? And the thing,
you switched wards?
Because we switched wards, we're buildings. Yeah. Because to me, that didn't, and the thing of growing up here in Utah that's so crazy is you don't realize that everyone doesn't believe in Joseph Smith in the world. And so that was, I think, just so interesting to me that I just thought everyone did. I mean, all the people that I was around, I felt like, believed in it and knew about it. And so that's just part of the bubble that we grow up in here that I think plays a role or plays a part in all of this. So,
but even talking about ways that it didn't stick, was your family oriented around Mormonism in terms of like church attendance and obeying the rules?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that
keeping the commandments.
Yes. Yeah. I think there was high expectations. And I think growing up, I had 4 sisters. I was the only boy. And I think I was always treated a little bit better than my sisters for whatever, being the only boy. And I think that was always something that I think all my sisters would agree with that too, that I was always the golden child and treated that way. And I think my mom always thought that, oh, well, Jeff will do it. Jeff's going to do what's right and be the perfect child. And I think there was some pressure that came with that too.
Did you identify with Nephi growing up?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So anything before your adolescence about your story or your family story that bears mention? I guess you have a scouting story you wanted to share, but what comes next in your story?
Yeah, probably that. So when I was in Scouts, and I was trying to remember when my age was. I think I was around 11 or 12, and there was two brothers in our ward, and one of them was bringing me like candy all the time. And obviously as a kid, you don't realize this is grooming type behavior, but I knew my mom was concerned of, you know, him doing that. And then his brother was very into scouting. He was into the Order of the Arrow, and he was into the Dickens Festival and dealing a lot with kids. And he was really high up. I mean, I don't know, in Utah, I remember when you'd got the Arrow of Light, you know, they'd have the people come and do a little presentation. He was always the one that would come. And so we had to go over to his house to pass off a merit badge. And I think it was not timed, but I'm not sure. But anyways, we go over to his house, we pass off the merit badge, and I said, okay, I'll call my mom. He said, oh, I can give you a ride home, but if you do me a favor first. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And he goes, actually, I'm doing this Order of the Arrow, and I need someone to like model these clothes that were like Indian, like loincloth type clothes. And so he had me go into the room, which he may have had camera. I don't know to this day, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, this was back in, you know, the late 80s. So, so he had me put on this stuff, and I remember coming out and being very, very scared and feeling very uncomfortable. And I had, you know, this loincloth that had my underwear on underneath. He goes, oh, could you take those off? And I remember being like, no, I'm not taking those off. And he's like, oh, it'd be so much better if you, and I remember having this little back and forth with him, and then we ended up tucking him in, but it was extremely uncomfortable for me. And then on the way home, he gave me a ride home. And he said, hey, this is for a special, you know, these pictures are for a special thing. So don't let anyone know, because we don't want this to get out. And obviously I was feeling shamed and really weird about it. So I'm like, I would not tell anyone that I just did that. And so I don't think I told a soul about that until several years later at scout camp. One of the other boys in our scout troop made a comment about it. And I said, oh, did he make you try that on? And I think it was like everyone had the same experience. And then he had gotten caught actually abusing. I think his brother and him actually had been caught, been abusing him, and he spent some time in jail later. But who knows how many, you know, kids were affected by that. And again, I share this story not because it was, I feel like I did not have, you know, severe abuse, but I think that potential was certainly there. And I think another thing is just how rampant was this in the church? You know, I mean, I think that it probably is much more rampant than we know.
Did you happen to hear my episode with Chris Swallow from a few years back?
I don't think so.
We'll include it in the show notes. It's an episode where he goes to like an uncle, and the uncle takes him into a shed, and he's got like a stack of sheepskin rugs. And he tells his nephew or whatever, the guy's name is Lowell Robinson. And he says, I import sheepskin rugs, and I need people to test them to tell me which ones are the softest. So will you strip down and take all your clothes off, roll around in the sheepskin rug, and do it for several rugs and tell me which one's the softest.
Ugh. Yeah.
And he did that with untold number of young boys. Yeah. And that's just, it's weird.
And I'm sure he's looking for who will take off their underwear. I mean, I'm sure these are all the things that he's testing, right? And doing this whole thing. I mean, yeah.
And we just did an episode with Tim Kosnoff about, you know, 80,000 Boy Scout sexual abuse victims, and like 40% they estimate are Mormon kids. So we're talking 32 to 100,000 victims of Boy Scout sexual abuse. So we'll include a link to that episode anyway. Anyway, it's a huge deal, and I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
Okay, where does your Mormon story go next? That's not a fun part, but I'm glad you weren't abused maybe as bad as others. So.
And can I just ask with regard to this, so about what age were you?
Yeah, I was trying, 11 or 12 would have been around that time. It could have been, because I think it was Boy Scouts. I'm not sure about that. I think it was Boy Scouts. So around 12-ish though, 12, maybe 13, somewhere in that area.
And so you had this experience where you felt just incredibly uncomfortable, and you just kind of held it to yourself for...
I remember telling my mom about it after he had been caught with the other kids. I told my mom at that time that, yeah, he had done this thing to me. And his brother was the one who was buying me. I mean, he showed up at my house with like this big backpack full of all this candy one time. And, you know, as a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, he's so nice, not recognizing or realizing that this is really not normal behavior for someone. So,
do you remember what came up for you as you kind of held this thing that happened to you, that probably at that age you had no idea how to think about it or how to sort of, do you remember what it felt like and what you did with it, and what, if there were any beliefs or things that you told yourself around it?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think I was a confident enough kid and a stable enough kid that I don't, besides remembering like the shame of like, oh my gosh, this is really embarrassing, I would never tell anyone I did this. I don't remember feeling like there was long-term, that it's something that traumatized me long-term from that. And I don't know if that's because of the stability and the confidence that I had or what it was, but I do feel like that's, I don't go back and think that I can track, you know, something that happened after that from it, which is I think very fortunate.
Yeah.
All right. Well, dark stuff, but it's so common in people's Mormon journey.
Yeah.
What comes next?
So I guess growing up, going to Brighton High School, I mean, basketball was a huge part of my life at that point. A friend and I, we won the state championship when I was a senior. A friend and I played doubles tennis and won state championship in tennis as my senior year. And so those were really big focuses.
What year did you graduate from high school?
96.
Okay. That's a big deal Utah cares about sports, especially football and basketball. So
yeah, it was my, for sure. I mean, the most important thing to me at that time was.
Did you play against players we would have heard of later, you know, playing at USU or BYU or any of that? U of U?
Yeah. Who would we have played against? Kevin, in a tournament we played at, Kevin Garnett was there. That was back in the,
wait, as a player?
The old days. Well, like at a tournament, he was at the tournament that we were at, so I didn't play against him directly. Mike Bibby was one that we had played against, who went to the pros and played for a while. I played on a travel team, and Jeff Johnson, who was a big player here in Utah, went pro, and his brother Britton Johnson, Jeff Johnson played on my team. Britton didn't play on it. But
any of the guys that played like at Division I schools in Utah?
Yeah, so Jeff Johnson, Mike Vrains, Dave Nilsson went to BYU. Josh Griffith was a teammate of mine who played on our team, and he went to Rick's College, and then so we had a bunch of us that played.
Super fun. Well, that's fun. Okay, so tennis and basketball. Were you in academics at all? And then talk about seminary.
Yeah, I think my academics, I always got pretty good grades. I think that it was never a huge focus of mine. I kind of kicked myself. I feel like I did the bare minimum to get through, which probably is pretty common. You know, I don't think I loved to learn when I was in high school, which I feel was a little unfortunate. But so I did. I always had, a good GPA. I think my worst class, I had an AP chemistry class with a strange teacher who it was, I think, my worst grade. And he told me that I was going to mess up. He'd never had anyone not pass the AP test, and so I was going to mess that up. But I got a 3, so I passed it. And seminary, I think, was the same thing. I mean, seminary in Utah was part of our day, and so
part of your school day.
It's part of our school day, and so I mean, a lot of times it was like, do we go to seminary or do we go to breakfast? And then I remember the teacher would like guilt you, like you get to give yourself your own grades, but it was almost like they're guilting you and did not. So I think I gave myself like a B- or a C+ or something in seminary because I didn't always go. But so I was never a huge person in seminary. And leading up to my mission, I went to Snow College for a year before and played basketball there before my mission. And going through all of that, I had started the Book of Mormon, 100 times, but I had never gotten through the Book of Mormon until I think the first time was one of my first days in the MTC that I finished it finally for the first time.
So what was your testimony like, maybe graduating from high school and preparing for your mission? How would you have described your testimony?
Yeah, surprisingly, I think it was pretty strong. I mean, I never had an experience that gave me a testimony, but I prayed regularly. I think, during this time, I guess this is another important thing to bring up now was, when you're going through, when you're growing up LDS, and a huge thing is the For Strength of Youth pamphlet. And so when, they talk about masturbation and they talk about petting and heavy petting, and no one ever tells you what those things were. They just assume that you know what those things are. And so when I was little, and I remember being quite little and pushing against blankets as a kid and not realizing that this felt good and there was no sexual part of this, but not realizing, as I got older, doing that was masturbating until I was like 14. And I remember recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm masturbating, and then feeling so much guilt and shame over it. And so, you go into the bishop and you tell him that you're, I've masturbated. And then you're like, I'm never going to do it again, right? I'm never going to do this again. And then you come out and inevitably you do it again. And then you're in this crossroads that I think so many young men in the church face, which is like, okay, do I go into the bishop repeatedly? Because at least what I was told was when you go to the bishop and you repent, those sins are gone unless you do it again, and then they all come back. And so I think there was this idea that I remember recognizing and realizing that yes, I'm actually masturbating, even no one had ever told me what that meant, and so that became I think a big source of shame and guilt that I've recognized now that started, I think, the pattern of what we do in the church is we bury it. We decide that no, we're gonna kind of push this down under and present this other part of ourself. And I think that's, and I really do. I trace that back to that young age when I was doing that and then feeling guilt and shame every time, every time you do it, you get this flood of guilt and shame, and it's so terrible because this is something that obviously God, if there's a God, that we've been given to relieve stress and to relieve pressure, and every time you're associating this with guilt and shame and these feelings, and so I think that is a huge part of my story and where we'll get to later is that.
You're a physician now, and I'm just curious if in the medical community there's a consensus on the health of something like masturbation, or if it's just never discussed.
Well, I'd say that's outside of my realm, but absolutely, I don't think anyone would that's studied. I mean, either from a mental health perspective or a physician perspective, would say that that's not a healthy thing to do. I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty well known, unless they're Mormons. I think they're the only ones holding on strong. Well, maybe some of the other evangelical or hardline high demand. Yeah.
Okay. So you were subject to the shame cycle.
Oh man,
Mormon shame cycle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that I didn't recognize how deep these layers went until our story, until we started to break it down a few years ago. But I definitely think that was the seeds, the beginning of this forcing things underground that I think is rampant in the church. I mean, I really do. I think it is so common in the church and you learn it at that age because you have to make that decision. Am I going to go into my bishop every time I do this, or am I going to either lie about it, or am I going to find some way to rationalize it in my brain, which I think is what I usually, tried to do, is rationalize it.
Yeah. Okay. So that was leading up to your decision to put in your papers for your mission?
Yeah. So I went to Snow College, spent a year at Snow, and then went on a mission. And I mean, the mission, when we talk about privilege, I mean, I think being white and being cis and being very competitive. I mean, a mission is made for a person like me, right? And I excelled at the mission. I mean, it was really, really easy. I mean, I feel like I was stressed out my entire mission from the time I stepped down to the time I left, because I felt like I couldn't do enough. And if and the people that I would miss if I wasn't working every day, all day long, I mean, I really feel like I was probably a miserable companion for a lot of the guys that I served with, because I was so rigid and strict, and I really think I got very much indoctrinated, and I think that's what the point of it is, right? They send us out at that age to try and get you indoctrinated and get you, all in, and I was definitely all in my mission.
Yeah. So do you want to just give us kind of the highlights, lowlights of your mission, and then maybe we'll switch over to Larissa.
Well,
where were you?
Jackson, Mississippi was the mission I was in. So we covered all of Louisiana and most of Mississippi, and even into Texarkana, Texas. So
that was a hotbed for the civil rights movement.
It was, yeah.
You would have noticed that on your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, I mean, it's really when I realized that, man, racism was alive and well on my mission. I mean, you really, really see that firsthand.
In Mormonism or just in Mississippi?
Oh, in Mormonism, absolutely. No, it was really challenging. I mean, so many of the people, I served in a lot of, inner city areas, and so we're teaching a lot of African Americans, and it was a huge struggle. I mean, most churches are still segregated in the South. I mean, even in Tennessee where we are, a lot of churches are still segregated. And
do you mean LDS churches or
no? I'm talking just churches in general. Yeah. And so they ask you, is this a white church or a black church? And even though churches wouldn't tell you they're segregated, I mean, the white people go to this one and the black people go to this one, and that's still. And so that was challenging to overcome. But
do you have any stories where you encountered LDS racism on your mission? And if you don't, that's fine.
Well, yeah. I was in Monroe, Louisiana, and there was a member who had been baptized, and he was the Moord mission leader, and he told us that he had a really, really hard time with with us teaching African-American people are doing that. And we actually had an African-American family in the bishopric at that time. And I said, well, what about this family? He said, oh, they're not black. Like he considered them white, which was really interesting that, he didn't consider them black or African-American at all, which is, and there's, a whole.
It's like if I'm friends with them, they're okay, but it's all the rest of them.
Well, and I think it went deeper than that. They probably were fitting the mold, like he saw them as they were acting like white people. And so therefore they weren't considered black people.
Were they kind of well-to-do and
for sure,
more affluent. And so he had kind of used that to say that's not black. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you ever get asked, wait, you're teaching, you're running in, you're attracting black people, African Americans. Would you ever get the question, wait, isn't the Mormon church racist, or didn't the Mormon church keep black people from having the priesthood or have them be second-class citizens,
Yeah.
And how were you taught, or how did you grow to answer those questions when you'd get them?
Gosh, I don't think it's so sad, but I don't think I did like a deep dive into it at that point. I just assumed that, God said it was okay. And, we'd always talk about in the Bible, in the New Testament, when Peter was told he could now go to the Gentiles, and that was just, we don't understand why, they couldn't go to them before, but now they could. And so
let's role play. So I'm a person of color on your mission, and I ask you the question. Will you tell me what you would have said? Like, are you comfortable? Because
I'll
say, hey, I hear you guys used to keep people like us from having the priesthood. How can you explain it? Pretend you're answering me.
Yeah. So in the New Testament, when Jesus sent his apostles out to share the gospel, and he told them first to go to the Jews, the Jewish people, and then later he told them to go to the Gentiles. And we don't understand why that was, but we know that it came after the fact. And so, we don't understand why God wouldn't allow black people to have the priesthood, but the great news is now he does. And I mean, and honestly, most people wouldn't know enough to ask that question. There were people that would ask that question. And I actually have a pretty vivid memory of the bishop in one of those wards. I believe it was his brother's wife was black. And I remember we ate dinner at their house one Sunday, and she shared her testimony about it. And it was really quite touching. You know, she was saying how important this was to her. But again, it's so unfortunate because you don't realize how arrogant you are. As you know, you're sent out there to teach, not to be taught. You know, they tell you that, you know, you're here to teach, you're not to be taught. And you think as a 19-year-old that you have all of life's answers to all of the questions.
What could they teach you?
Right. And it's just, I feel like this is part of the pathway we set Mormon men especially, although I think women too, but Mormon men especially, we set them on this path of you're better, you're more important, you know more, you have all of the keys to eternal life, and I think it's so harmful and it's so dangerous. And I realize that now, and it's just so bad. Another thing that I should mention, and I think one of your guests recently had talked about Lawrence C. Dunn coming to the mission. I can't remember who that was, but he came to our mission, and I was with my first companion, and my first companion, I drove him nuts. He was having a hard time and didn't want to. He was having some injuries, and so was having a hard time working, and I was just driving him crazy. And then Lawrence C. Dunn came to the mission, and he told us, he said, you're here to find the blood of Israel. So when someone answers the door, you share with them that you're a representative of Jesus Christ, and you've come to invite them to be baptized into Jesus Christ Church. And he said, and then you ask them to come in and give a prayer. You ask them, you want to give a prayer, a blessing on their home. And then if they let you, when you get done with the blessing, you then tell them that God wants you. He said they'll be crying, and then God wants you to be a member of his church. We invite you to be baptized. And this became the mantra that we lived by. And I mean, this was the thing. And then I'll never forget this too. When he gave his testimony, Lawrence C. Dunn, you know, you have all the missionaries there, and he's giving his testimony, and he says at the very end, he's sharing his testimony at the end, he said, I know God lives. And then he pauses for and he starts getting a little bit louder. I know God lives. He said it 12 times until the end. It was so strong. I honestly thought this guy has seen Jesus. That's what he's inferring. That's what he wants me to believe, right? And at that point in my life, I had no doubt that he had. I mean, that's how in it I was. And I feel like, you know, at that point you're wanting to starting to climb up that ladder of leadership. And I became an AP in the mission, and I was really close with my president. I actually was given a blessing before I left that I would be in the leadership of the mission, and that and they told me that I would be have greater things than even my dad. My dad was a bishop at the time, or something like that. I mean,
So you're going to be an apostle someday.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Steve McConkey is the one that gave me the blessing.
No. He was in the stake president. He was my young men's president.
Yeah.
Bruce R. McConkey's son.
Bruce R. McConkey's son, yeah.
Okay.
So
so you were in it to win it.
I was in it to win it, man.
Okay.
I was in it to win it. And
did you ever end up baptizing any black men or women?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think of the people that I baptized, I mean, more were African American than were white. Yeah.
Any idea if any of them are still active or not? Or?
You know, so one of the women that I baptized, she actually came out and went, and I feel, you know, I kept telling her, if you can just get to the temple, then you'll know. This is just, I feel like it's so, I have such these mixed emotions about doing this. So she came out and went through the temple with my family while I was on a mission. And I think she came out and visited once afterwards too. Her and her son, and then her mom ended up getting baptized as well. They were in a Pentecostal church before, and she's not in anymore. I know that. And I don't know of anyone who is. It's really, really challenging. I mean, the church is really hard to to be a part of, and in the South, and in the, you know, she lives out in the country in the South, and it's hard to stay faithful. She stayed faithful and active for a while, and then I think that branch ended up getting dissolved that they were a part of. So,
okay. So anything else before we switch over to Larissa, just about your life up through your mission?
So I think this is important to mention, you know, as I had gone through my upbringing and always struggled with masturbation and, as part of my story. And then on the mission, I squelched that thing out of me. I mean, there was no like thought of it. And I think this is important again for later, because I think I thought I was crushing it, not realizing that God, I mean, we're given our sexuality for a reason, and squelching it out isn't necessarily a good thing either. I shouldn't say that. I say it's not a good thing either. It's definitely not, because, you know, I think, again, I think you have this thing in the church where you have a certain low percentage of men who can do this. They can squelch their sexuality out completely, and they think that they're killing it. They're doing so great, but that's still dysfunctional. Whether it's dysfunction from the shame and the guilt and doing it, or it's dysfunction from squelching it out. There's dysfunction either side, and I think we'll get into that later.
Such a good point.
Yeah. That was me.
So this is interesting. I'll just put this little to me because I don't know if I'll remember it later. I was talking a few months ago with a friend who I was friends with in high school, and I was like, you know that you masturbated, right? I mean, and he said, no, I never did till after my mission. And I'm like, are you serious? You never did? And I go, you never like rubbed against it? He's like, oh yeah, but I never orgasmed. So again, these are the circles we play, or the rationalization we do with ourselves, right? Is that in the church, I mean, it's just like soaking. It's like these weird things we do so that we can say, no, I never masturbated. I just I just did it up until the point that I had to orgasm. I never orgasmed. So I can say, I can answer it truthfully. I mean, how ridiculous is it? It's so terrible and dysfunctional.
Yeah, so true.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
No, I just want to add one thing that we talk about a lot is, you know, Jeff had mentioned his family was, you know, like I wouldn't say they were just like super hardcore, intense LDS, but you feel like your mission almost like put you in the mode of like, I'm going to go hard with this. Man. Sometimes we'll even use the word kind of radicalized you, because he was super, super intense, super, you know, just like follow every single rule, and then you were rewarded for it. So he was consistently put in leadership for that type of behavior. And so we kind of, when we talk about this is something that I know you identify a lot, is that you get rewarded for being that type. And do you want to tell your story about exercise? Because I feel like this is it's a good way to understand like this type of scrupulosity on a mission.
To the level that it went. So at the end of my mission.
Well, you had like exercise was really important to you.
Yeah, so I got up my whole mission at 5 a.m. to work out. I mean, I'd get up at 5 and then I'd start reading my scriptures at 6. And I mean, I was just, and most of my companions I would, you know, get up with me. One of my companions, I think, lost 35 pounds in like the 4 months I was with because I was eating like not healthy. I mean, by this standards, they weren't healthy, but I was trying to stick to this called the zone diet. It was a kind of a fad diet back then. But so at the end of my mission, I was in as an assistant, and the mission president's wife, who was wonderful. She and I had a very good relationship. She has passed, but she gave a talk about what are we willing to sacrifice? You know, what are we willing to sacrifice to be better missionaries? And so I started to think that God required me to sacrifice my hour of exercise, that this was like something that it was so important to me that God wanted me to like give that up. And so I had my companion like give me a blessing, and I did. I quit. I think I quit doing any like lifting the last month. I think I'd still go jogging like sometimes, but the last little bit. And again, I think this just emphasizes like how powerful these things in our mind. I mean, I really felt like this was the Spirit like talking to me. And you know, on my mission, I think I had what I would consider extremely spiritual experiences. And the thing that's so fascinating to me now is I have these experiences, but I'm no longer a member. You know, like, how do you explain that? This feeling that you have that I'm convinced is human connection, and I have it with my patients on a daily basis, and sometimes stronger than other times. But you know, as a mission, you're thinking it's telling you that the church is true and that the Book of Mormon is true. And honestly, when you're out on a mission and you're connecting with people, it's almost inevitable you're going to have these feelings, and then it's going to drill this into you again, make you more rigid. But I yes, it's true. When I came home from my mission, I feel like I was extremely judgmental of my own family. You know, we weren't going hard enough. They weren't doing all the things. I think I almost put my mission president and his wife up on this pedestal of like, this is what it should look like. And I mean, it's just, layers of not healthy. But again, it was made for me. I mean, these are, and I still think I had trauma from my mission now as I go back and unpack it. But I think that the mission experience was made for people like me, and I excelled at it, and you know, I feel bad for so many people that it's so miserable for, because I know that it is.
You know, nowadays, so many missionaries are coming home, and conversion rates are so small, retention rates are so small. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that the missions are for the missionaries, not as much for converts.
Yeah. You know, I had a call last week out of the blue. I used to be our Stake Young Men's president. So I got a call out of the blue, and he said, "Hey, this is so-and-so. I'm on my mission right now." And I thought, oh boy, he's going to like try, he heard I left the church. He's going to try and convert me. He said, I don't believe it, and I don't know what to do. And he's like, I knew you had left, so I just needed to talk to someone. And he called me from his mission to say that, which I just thought, oh gosh, I just couldn't imagine being out there and doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so interesting as you're describing in detail how, like, who you became on your mission, because on a level it feels like an altered reality, but then it also feels like you were in an altered state.
Yeah. In
that reality, like the so optimized.
Yeah.
So on a level disconnected from kind of your inner, anything inner, and just hustle.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I remember going, and this is, I mean, just the level that I was at. So we'd do zone conferences, and people would come in, you'd stay in someone's flat, you know, that night. And I remember some of the guys would be like wrestling or playing, and I'd be reading my scriptures almost as like to prove a point, like I'm above you. Like, I mean, it's so toxic and terrible. But again, this is what it does. Everything is a hierarchy, right? Yeah. And we're always constantly trying to be the top of the hierarchy. Yeah. And I really excelled at that. I mean, it's something that I really excelled at, and I'm not proud of that at this point, but it really is true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it works until it kind of falls apart. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 But I bet by the end of your mission, you're feeling like it was the best thing you ever did, right?
I did. And you know, I came home from my mission, and I think I was so glad to be done because of the stress I put on myself to be so busy, and like every second, if I didn't take advantage of it, someone would not have the gospel, and then it was my fault. I mean, and again, I think these are the things you hear that again are toxic. That is not a nice way to live your life. And so for me, coming home from my mission was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to be on level 10 like every day, you know, all the time. And then I could just start being very judgmental of everyone, which was nice.
Yeah. Perfect. But coming home from your mission, you were converted and committed to the church. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
Big time.
And you know, I do think I want to emphasize this thing that it's so terrible to think that we are better. We have more knowledge. We have more understanding. I was never told, go find out about these people in the South, you know, go find out what they believe and like how they believe it. And I know it was always like, you're here to teach, you're here to baptize. And as a 19-year-old kid, sending them out with that information is just not healthy. You know, like I just think of like how great it is for kids to travel the world and like see how other people live. But a mission is not that. You're you're sent out there with the role that you know more than these people. You are better than these people. You know, I know they don't say that, but it's inferred, and like, you know, you have what they need, and you're their ticket to salvation, and you're their ticket to the celestial kingdom. And I just think it's really bad messaging.
Yeah.
And I think to be in that setting where you're with, you know, you're in a lot of like inner city areas, and to not, I'm just laughing now to think like, to not understand what systemic poverty does to people, or systemic racism, like how this is like to just totally be like, that doesn't matter. Only what I know about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon matters. I mean, it's just, you're just going into that with so little information about what is real, what people are really experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like lost opportunity to connect,
right?
To really see.
Because it could be
Absolutely.
that, but yeah.
Yes, I never once heard anyone ever on my mission talk about, you know, why is racism, you know, this way, or why is this built into the system, or why are these people in this situation? It was only the only way for them to get out was to give them the gospel, right? That was their only ticket to getting out of the situation that they're in, which
it's kind of cultural colonialism.
Oh, absolutely.
It is, yeah.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a quick question. So when you got home from your mission, this time of like optimizing, constant hustling, feeling this sense of really over responsibility to everyone else around you, right? How did you feel? Were you on fire? Did you feel exhausted? Like, how did you feel coming out of that?
Well, I think that I felt like, thank goodness that's over. I was not someone who wanted my mission. I wasn't one of these guys who's like, I longed for my mission. I didn't, because I felt like it was just so much stress for me. But yes, coming home was, I mean, I think that I still was very much on fire and trying to read my scriptures every day and still get up at 5 a.m. every day. And I mean, I still kept a pretty regimented schedule for a long time after that.
Yeah. So remnants, you had remnants that you kept.
Oh,
of that
yes,
sort of
absolutely.
hyper disciplined.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went back to Snow, and then you were called as the Elders Quorum president.
Yeah.
Right after his mission. And so again, I think this is continually being validated.
Reinforced.
Yes.
Reinforced,
absolutely.
Positive reinforcement.
I'm going hard, and then they put me in leadership, and now I have
climb
authority.
that ladder,
and
that's the validation. Yes, that's, I think, a huge part of the church. That.
I mean, the flip side is you get identity, you get morality, you get spirituality, you get meaning, you get purpose, you get direction. And so I guess there's two sides to that coin, right?
Yeah. You get guilt and you get shame, but you're right. There is two sides.
And you do become somewhat, I mean, you are getting validated from an external source. So, like, I don't know if that's, I mean, I don't think that's the healthiest form of being validated. Mm-hmm. And so, you may get purpose, but is it not exactly what you should be getting your purpose from?
I bet we're going to get there in your story.
Yes.
But yeah, that's beautiful. All right. Well, Jeff, thanks for telling the beginnings of your story. If there's something we left out, we can come back to it.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Larissa.
I'm ready.
You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's go back, maybe even to your grandparents.
Yes.
I don't know, where does your Mormon story begin?
Well, so I have pioneer heritage on one side. So on my mom's side, we have pioneer heritage. In fact, Zina Huntington was I think she was the third wife of Joseph Smith. And then when he died, she was given to Brigham Young. So she was also, and she was also married to somebody else. So she was married to somebody else. And then she was sealed to Joseph Smith. So anyway, so her younger brother is Oliver Boardman Huntington, and he's kind of like a pioneer name because he also was a polygamist. So there's a lot of people that come from him. So I'm come from Oliver Boardman Huntington. So on one side of my family, we have strong, pioneer roots, and I grew up hearing pioneer stories. And then Yeah. So the other side, so that's my mom's side. And then on the other side, on my dad is Japanese American. So, and a lot of times when you hear about a mixed race Asian couple, you assume that the mother is Asian and the father is white. That's a kind of a common sort of stereotypical relationship, but mine's flipped. So my mom is white and then my dad is Japanese. So, so my great grandparents, actually maybe this would be great. But anyways, they came when there was kind of a wave of Japanese immigration in the early 1900s. And it was actually because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So they thought there were too many Chinese coming. And so they said, we can't take any more Chinese people in the United States. And so it kind of opened the door for Japanese people to come. And so they came in the early 1900s. And so they were here. My grandparents were Buddhist. And
do you know if they came to work on the railroads? Or
they came to farm.
Northern California.
So my first the people who first came, they were involved in like the fishing industry.
Oh.
So they lived in I think the Bay Area.
Okay.
And like were involved in the fishing industry. And then I know that I've done a little bit of research on this. There was some Japanese businessman that kind of created some farming opportunities in like central Utah. And so it brought a lot of Japanese immigrants actually into kind of like the Mormon belt. So, so they'd been here. So my Japanese family had been here for a little bit. And then my grandpa was 19 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed. 41, yeah. So December 41, Pearl Harbor is bombed, and obviously, it kind of like creates this whole wave of anti-Japanese sentiment. So by February of 42, you have the executive order, which is 9066, that said that all Japanese people, they'd kind of like designated like these are zones that Japanese people cannot be. So you need to leave them. So at first they were just like, you have to go. And then it kind of
go back to Japan.
No, you had to go in like to the
area.
Yeah, you leave the area. So it was like the East Coast and the West Coast. So I think they didn't want them in areas where I don't know, they could be involved in signaling or anything like that, where they could like welcome any type of foreign threat.
So they pushed them inland?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So they made these, camps, and they're all over. There's one in Wyoming. There was one in Idaho. There's Topaz, which is in Utah. And so, there's quite a few camps, 150,000 around that number, Japanese, people of Japanese descent were relocated off the West Coast and then put in the camps. And I think more than 2/3 of them were American citizens. So some of them were immigrants that had just come and couldn't get citizenship yet, but most of them had been born here. And so my grandpa is one of these people. So he was born in the United States and had American citizenship, and then he was relocated.
Wow.
And do you know where in Utah?
Where Topaz is?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. I know that we've been out of Utah for a long time. Most of our adult life, we haven't lived in Utah. I know that my siblings have all gone. There's a memorial and a museum at Topaz now, and I haven't been to it. But
It looks like it might be western Utah, kind of.
It's like I know it's just out in the middle of nowhere.
Kind of central western Utah. That's what Google's telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Topaz Internment campsite is near Delta.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're saying there were potentially over 100,000 Japanese Americans primarily interned in the 1940s in western central Utah.
Yeah, not just I don't know how many Topaz would have had, but they would have been spread around. And then one of the biggest ones is Manzanar, and that's in California. That had quite a few Japanese. So that one is one that's mentioned a lot. So.
And are you saying your grandpa was in these camps?
So my grandpa didn't go to a camp. So this is interesting. So my grandpa, this is kind of our family folklore, is that my grandpa was working. I think he was, 19 years old, and he.
Wait, really quick, did your great grandparents go to a concentration camp?
No.
Okay.
So they did it. Yeah. So my, I believe that just my great grandma was alive at the time. So my grandpa, he was working and his car was in the shop, and they told everybody, like, you've got to like check into one of these places, these like war relocation offices. And so, but nobody would fix his car because he was Japanese. And so they just like, people refused, like they just wouldn't do it. It was just so tense after like Pearl Harbor. And so they had to get like the military, like a military person involved to tell someone to go fix his car so that he could be relocated. It's like really sad. But anyway, so they actually had a family sponsor them. So this is something that you could do. A family could vouch for you and say, like, we take responsibility for these people. We know them. We know that they're safe. And then if anything happens, we will take responsibility for this. So my grandpa's family had a white family vouch for them.
Where?
In Idaho.
Oh.
And was that everywhere that you could
do that? You could do that, but it didn't happen very.
It didn't happen
very commonly.
Okay.
Was that an LDS Idaho family?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine.
I would be interested to know that, but yeah, I don't know.
Were they LDS at this point?
They were not.
Okay.
Yeah, they were not. So
may I just make tell one quick story?
Yes, please.
I was at BYU as a student, and for me it was like Dorothy going to Oz. I grew up in Texas as a Mormon, but like BYU is like the Mecca. And I remember my professor, Lynn England, in an honors colloquium class at BYU, telling the story that when he was a boy growing up in Utah, his Mormon family during World War II, would all get down on their knees and say prayers. And he said that in their prayers, they would say, "Dear Heavenly Father, please bless all your children except for the Japs and the Germans." Jeez. And I know that's an offensive story, but I was shocked when I heard it. But I think it's important to convey that a loving Mormon family that was very Christian during this time, faithful, good people, that would enter their prayers. That's just how intense the anti-German and Japanese sentiment was. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and I laugh not because it's not funny at all, but I think that that's not an uncommon thing. And I'm pretty sure that it was the governor of Idaho that said this. So there's a really good book if anyone's interested in learning more about the internment. It's called Infamy. And it's a guy that is a reporter that actually just did a deep dive into like everything that happened and who are the players and who was helpful and who was not helpful and, like who are the activists, what happened. So it's a really good book. But I think it was the governor of Idaho when they interviewed, or, I think he was like at a press conference talking about the camps and what they were doing. And I think maybe somebody questioned him about like, these are U.S. citizens. And he said a Jap is always a Jap. And it was the same thing. It was just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you live here, you're bad, like to your core. And so this is kind of the America that my grandfather grew up in. And I didn't know this till recently, but my grandma, she was actually, her family came to the States and went to central Utah. So she wasn't part of the relocation because she wasn't West Coast. But my sister had told me recently that that after Pearl Harbor, they had a lot of the cities would get kind of intense or stressed out if they had Japanese citizens, and so I think some of the city officials had asked them to give up any weapons that they had or anything that could possibly be a weapon, and some of that even included farm equipment. So they had to kind of surrender their farm equipment. And this was in central Utah. It's, small town central Utah, which was probably mostly LDS. And so that was my grandma's story. So she wasn't interned or relocated, but that's what happened to them. And then my grandpa was actually relocated into Idaho.
Yeah, and that's in my parents' lifetime, so it's not like this is 5 generations removed. Yeah. This is literally one generation up for me. Yeah, and that shapes all of us. So it's a
It's crazy.
It's a very significant thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my grandpa, after they wouldn't let the Japanese fight in the war. And I think that so many Japanese people wanted to prove that they were loyal. You know, this is the only place that my grandpa had ever lived. And so they wouldn't let the Japanese fight in the war. And then eventually they formed an all Japanese like military army unit, and they're the 442nd. And so they're one of the most highly decorated units in the army. And there's like a PBS documentary about them. And they're, anyway, so my grandpa fought with the 442nd in World War II after this like happened to him. So he fought with the 442nd, and they sent them to Germany. I think he was maybe in France and Germany, because they were still worried that maybe they couldn't fight Japanese people, and so they wouldn't send them to, you know, the Asian action. They sent them to Europe. So yeah, my grandpa fought in the war, and then and then came home, and then he met my grandma, and they settled in Utah. So they stayed in Utah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you know where in Utah?
So I don't. So they lived in Linden, just right by
Utah
Pleasant
County.
Grove. Yeah, Utah County. I don't know if they always lived there.
Okay.
But they had lived there. I think they lived there for a long time.
Did they join the church?
No. So this is kind of an interesting story about how my dad becomes a member of the church. So they have 3 kids, and this was very common with, I think especially with Asian American families, because of the racism that they had experienced. They worked really hard to Americanize their kids. And I feel like it's maybe one of the greatest tragedies of my life, because there's so much culture loss, because things weren't passed down to connect us with who we are and where our people came from.
Yes.
So my grandma and grandpa spoke Japanese as their first language, and they never spoke Japanese to their kids. So imagine having kids, and you're trying to connect with them, you're trying to raise them, and you don't even speak, you won't even speak your language, the one that you're most comfortable with, the one that you know, are probably most able to communicate with. They would not speak. So my dad is full Japanese, and he doesn't speak a word of Japanese. Wow. So they would not speak Japanese to their kids, and they have really classic names like Carol and Mike, and because they, you know, like people, you know, white people can't say Asian names very well, or I mean, now they're probably better at it, but
That is so interesting, though,
it's
that
really
connection with a trauma.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just sort of like trying to create safety for yourself in a place that has all of a sudden turned incredibly threatening. It's turned against you in a minute.
It's just so sad, because, you know, I think my generation, I think we are trying to understand our identity and what this means for us, because, you know, I'm Asian, but there's a lot of things that I don't connect with about being Asian, but there's also times that I have felt othered by growing up in a very Caucasian area. And so it's a hard thing to try to like work out what is my identity. And usually you really rely on your grandparents to connect you with this identity. And they felt like they couldn't do that because of the experiences that they had. And so it's just, I feel like I'm part of a generation that we are almost like reeling from this loss of culture and kind of trying to like flush out what our identity is. And so I feel like I know a lot of other, you know, 3rd and 4th generation Asian Americans who are really trying to like reconnect and say like, what is this? And that's kind of part of my story. This is kind of like, I kind of have an Asian renaissance that happens to me after we adopt our kids. And so yeah.
And maybe a Mormon or an LDS church member who's not super empathetic would be like, well, what's the big deal? It's not God's culture. This is, you know, Utah is God's culture.
Yeah.
Utah Mormonism is God's culture. But just imagine not having your pioneer ancestry. Imagine for Utah Mormons, think about Pioneer Day and the way you told stories about your ancestors and had pride and family pride and culture, food and stories and hand-me-downs. Imagine having all that wiped away
Yeah.
And it's just like you and your parents, and like drop the language, switch the language, drop the stories, drop everything, change your food, change your clothing, change your family lore, and then just try to assimilate into this completely foreign culture to you.
Yeah.
That's a huge loss that privilege is just swimming in and not even realizing how good you have it. Right.
Right.
And
I think one thing that I think that maybe people in the church don't always realize is that Mormon culture is white culture. I mean, it's European, like it comes from European roots. It's connected to Protestantism. The food is white, like the stories are white. So the church has its own cultural and racial identity, but because it's part of the mainstream, it's almost not identified, if that makes sense. Right. And so it just becomes like, no, this is universal. This is like you said, this is God's culture, but it's not. It's actually white culture. But you don't identify it because it's part of the normal. And so right now, we'll talk more about this. So I went back to school a couple years ago. So I'm in women's and gender studies program, and there's a professor that was telling us that what she does when she speaks is she'll talk to a group of people, and she'll say, think of 5 things about yourself. So in this room right here, like if I said, like, John, tell me like 5 things about yourself, you might be like, oh, I'm a podcaster, and I'm a dad, and or these different things. And then you might say some things, and you might say some things. And if I was asked, I would first say I'm Asian. So I would say I'm Asian American. That's a very important part of my identity. And you also have a racial identity, but because it's part of the mainstream,
I would never say I'm white.
You would never start and be like, yeah, well, I'm white. People would be like, oh, good for you. And
that's not because I'm more enlightened. It's because I swim in so much privilege.
It's because it's And so in my classes, we learned that it's called an invisible identity. It's part of your identity, but it's invisible because it's been treated as it's mainstream, and it gets treated as the universal.
That's so good.
And I think that this is something that became a big deal to me once we start raising kids of other races too, is starting to understand not only like, what's my racial identity? How do my children find their racial identity? And, it's so hard because I feel like what I've encountered in the church is so many people that try to disregard your racial identity. And, I'm a big fan of the sisters in Zion. I think that they're doing really good work, and I've loved them. I followed them for a long time, and people are always telling them like, quit making it about race. And I'm like, no, yours is about race too. It just is. It's just your race. It's, the church is about the church has an identity. You're just not identifying it for what it is. And yeah, like you said, like you can love your pioneer ancestry, but can you be unapologetically Black in the church? Maybe sometimes, but a lot of times people will accuse you and say like, quit making it about race, or you need to move on and let these things go. And so, anyways, yeah, it's an interesting thing, I think, in the church to look at and try to understand how racial identity plays a part in it.
It reminds me of David Bednar when he said, there are no
there are no Latter-day
Saints. I mean, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We're just you come in and then you just become a Latter-day Saint, and by default you're white. This if you look back, that's what we're telling them, right? And you'll become more white the better you are.
So, and I know that Nelson recently gave some type of a talk and was kind of addressing this, and he was saying, our most important identity is that we're children of God. And I do understand what he's saying on some level, that like we're human beings, and that is the most important part of our identity. But I've heard so many members use that as a way to discount other people's racial identity. Like, why are you making this about race? We're all just children of God. And so I feel like that rhetoric, while it's based in something that is true, like we're all human beings, like that's who we are. But you have to understand what that person's racial experience was if you want to understand their human experience.
And living, I think, in a culture of white supremacy.
Yeah.
Too. It's sort of like that idea of like, you know, white people saying, well, I don't see color.
Yeah.
In a system that absolutely plays to white people and absolutely sees color. And where it's run and people are, you know, really punished and rights denied and
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, this is kind of like the water that we're all swimming in. You know, like there's homophobia, there's racism, there's patriarchy, there's sexism, you know. So these are all things that we have to kind of square with, that we have internalized some of these. Every single one of us has internalized these things because it's just the water that we're swimming in. So I always feel like the biggest red flag is when someone is like, oh no, that's not me, or I would not do that. And I think even for us, like me as a biracial woman and a parent to Black children, I think I constantly have to be saying, have I internalized messages? Like, am I put, you know, like what have I internalized that is also not healthy? I feel like that's the only way that we can actually know that we're doing the work is if we're looking at ourselves and saying like, have I internalized this? Or like, where's this idea coming from? And am I feeling this way for a reason? Or is it, you know, so I just think like looking inwardly and checking yourself. And if you ever find yourself saying like, nope, I'm not racist, then I feel like you have to be like, I don't know. I feel like that's the red flag for me, is when you just think like, nope, I haven't internalized all of these like things that have happened like in our country. I haven't internalized any of it.
Or I don't see color.
Yeah.
I judge people by the content of their character.
Yeah.
Do you find that education on a basic level is a key component to making that reflection process more effective?
Oh, yeah. I do. And honestly, like I'm really, really big on like people telling their stories, because I think that once you start hearing like, this is actually what it was like, then it just changes things. And, you know, I listened to the LDS Discussions podcast the other day. So you and Mike are talking about, you know, racism, and it's all very good. And it's, you know, like it's very informative. But then you get a caller in who says, this is how this affected me in my life. Like, this is how this plays out in today, in day-to-day life. And then I'm crying while I'm listening to it, because now I understand, like, you're telling the issues, you're giving the education. But when she comes on and tells her story, that's when you're like, this is someone's life. This is someone's life that we're dealing with that they're dealing with this on a daily basis. It has affected and harmed them. So I think that education and then people telling their stories and their experiences.
Exactly.
I think that's the thing. So,
well, part of that's getting out of our bubbles too, right? I mean, traveling or interacting with people that aren't like us. I mean, I just think it's so important to see things from someone else's perspective and try and empathize with other people in their situation, not just looking at them and being like, oh, that's too bad that you're in this situation. You know, why are they in this situation? How does that feel?
Yeah.
And we haven't even got to your story yet. So this is so great.
This is just my grandparents.
So your grandparents moved to Linden and assimilate.
Yes, they assimilate hard. So I didn't, this is something I also found out recently. So they were practicing Buddhist.
Whoa, in Linden?
Like underground. So they were kind of doing it like quietly. And I guess my sister had told me this, and she had talked to, I think she had talked to my aunt, but she was saying that they had even like connected with a Buddhist priest from the temple in Salt Lake who would come and like do blessings on their house, or, you know, like do different like festivals. But I never knew about it. And I think they kept it really, really quiet. Do you know what their professions were? You know? So my grandpa was like, he was a military, so he was like a career military person, but he did like mechanic type work for them. So I think he worked on like military vehicles. And then my grandma, she's pretty cool. So in the later 40s, her and her sisters all went to New York to go to culinary school. So she went to like school to learn how to be, I think she did baking. And so I have this like absolutely iconic picture of them. And I think they're like on the top of like the Chrysler building or something. And they're just these like three like gorgeous, classy, like Japanese women. And they're wearing like long coats. And it's like, and behind them is like New York in like the 1940s. And so it's just like a beautiful picture. So my grandma did that. She actually had a hard time getting hired I think because she was Japanese after that. And so she just kind of baked like for friends and family. And then she did the stay-at-home mom thing. So
wow.
So that was them.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah. So they have 3 kids. And then when my dad's the youngest, and when he was probably a little bit older than 8, but it was close to like LDS baptism age, they decided to have all their kids baptized. And it was purely to assimilate. So it was like one day they were like, all 3 of you are getting baptized. So they all get baptized. And but you know, like it wasn't like they became culturally LDS. It was just so that they could kind of blend in. I think my dad probably went to some social activities. But my dad went to Snow College when he graduated.
Oh.
And then he kind of I think he got a group of friends that were LDS, and they were all going on missions. And so my dad actually served a mission.
What?
Yeah, I know. So he serves a mission in Sacramento, and then he came home and was like, you know, like, I'm home from a mission, and he was just doing the thing. And so he came home and got married to my mom.
Do you get a sense that by the time your dad was serving a mission, he was converted to the church?
I would assume he was. So after him and my mom got married, he was in and out of activity, but mostly inactive for my life. And so, but I think that he was. My mom came from a pretty hardcore, you know, devout LDS family. And so I think that since he was just home from his mission, I think that that's probably something that appealed to her, is that he seemed like he was really devout and into the gospel. And so I think that he probably was fairly converted on his mission, but obviously it didn't stick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, and my dad has an interesting story about his patriarchal blessing. So he got his patriarchal blessing before he went on his mission, and he went, and they did not tell him what tribe he came from.
What the?
So, this is what they used to say. I wonder, do they kind of downplay this now? They used to say that, like, this is one of the most important reasons that you get a patriarchal blessing, is because you need to know
your lineage.
To get your
lineage.
lineage.
One of the main points is to get your lineage.
Yes. So my dad didn't get a lineage. And so I think he was like telling somebody, and they were like, oh no, you have to go back, because they have to tell you your lineage. So he goes back to the patriarch, and so he gets kind of like an addendum to his patriarchal blessing. And the addendum said that he's not from the house of Israel, but he's now adopted into the house of Abraham.
What?
So it's like super weird, because I know other Japanese people that they were like, you're from the tribe of Ephraim. So,
and non-Mormons who are listeners are like, what is this? So like when you get your patriarchal blessing at 16, around 16, mm-hmm. you're this 80-year-old or 70-year-old dude puts his hands on your head and tells you which of the tribes of Israel you're a descendant of. Mm-hmm. And most white Mormons are told they're from Ephraim. And then sometimes certain Mormons of color are told they're Manasseh.
They'll be told
This is all weird. I mean, this whole idea of lineage is a super racist thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had my ancestry DNA done, and it confirmed that I am not Hebrew at all.
Yeah. But Mormons are all told they're Israelites.
My own personal DNA studies, are kind of throwing that into question.
But somehow Utah Mormons or Idahoans are all from the tribe of Israel, from Ephraim and Manasseh. Or if you're Jewish, you would have been told the tribe of Judah, I think. Right.
Yeah.
Not a lot of Jews are converting
Depends
to Mormonism.
if they knew you were Jewish.
Right. But then if you're Japanese, you don't get
apparently
a lineage.
You're not apparently. At all. But I think the thing that makes me laugh is the lack of consistency.
Or your generic Abrahamic.
Yeah. It wasn't even like House of Israel. It was just kind of like, you can be in Abraham's family. It's fine. So yeah, I feel like it's so funny, because I mean, I had heard this story a long time ago, and I was like, that's so strange, like trying to square with like what's going on. But now I just feel like it's really funny. And I'm like, oh, I bet his patriarch was just like, oh, he's Asian, so he can't be House of Israel.
Yeah.
So, and we don't really know, you didn't come from that. And so we just have to say this.
But it's weird, because God's supposed to be telling the patriarch, so God should know. And he's supposed to be telling the patriarch what the lineage is.
Oh, yeah. But I'm telling you, I know other Asian people that are like, oh, I'm from Ephraim, like that have been told that they were just from a normal, like standard tribe. And so
random, right?
It's very random. Yeah. It's kind of just a weird, funny thing.
It's patriarch roulette. What do we say?
Patriarchy roulette.
Patriarch roulette. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
So your dad
interesting,
comes back from his mission in Sacramento.
Yeah. Gets married to my mom. And
wait, where do they meet?
So he, you know what? I think it was maybe a singles ward, and he was like teaching the Sunday school class, and she met him. And my mom was super young. She was 8. My mom was at BYU, 18 years old, and they got married really quick. And then she started having babies and doing the thing.
Like this would have been in the 70s, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Early
and I'm
70s.
kind of wondering, like today the Mormon church still warns against interracial marriage.
Yeah.
So your white mom marries the Caucasian, I don't know what the word is, Caucasian mom.
Yeah.
Marries a Japanese dad.
Yes.
I just wonder what type of racial community, racial, comments.
Judgment.
Judgment.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I don't. So I've asked my mom this, and she doesn't feel like she got that there was a lot of that she heard, except from her grandma, who's my great grandma, who said, she said, if your grandpa was alive, he'd be rolling, he's rolling in his grave right now because you're marrying a Jap. So like she uses this like a racial slur. And
this
so
your mom's mom, so who's white.
It's my mom's grandma.
Okay.
So she said like I'm so glad your grandfather isn't alive to know that you're marrying a Jap.
And she would have been Mormon. She would have been Mormon.
Yeah. They're
so
all
the Mormon grandma says,
wow.
Yes.
I can't believe you're marrying a Jap. Your grandpa would be rolling in his grave.
Yeah. And I don't know. I feel like, when I was growing up, I don't feel like my mom kind of like had this awareness of what would happen, like what it would be like raising multiracial kids or what the consequence of that would be. I don't think she was really tuned into, this different dynamic that she was taking on. And so I don't know how aware she might have been, but I don't think she experienced any really, really open racism towards her and my dad.
Okay. And your mom grew up where?
My mom grew up in Salt Lake, and then when she was in high school, moved to American Fork.
What high school was your mom in? You know?
She went to American Fork High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think she was...
So you're a 2-generation caveman, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm so proud. Yeah.
I'm so proud.
It's a rich family.
Shout out to Main Sermon, another caveman that we've interviewed on Mormon Stories from Imagine Dragons.
That's right.
All right. Okay, so your mom and dad, your white Mormon mom and your assimilated Japanese Mormon dad get married in the 70s.
Yes, they do. Yeah, early 70s. So they start having kids. So there's eventually going to be 8 kids, and I'm the 4th. So I'm right in the middle. And my mom had her 4th child when she was 24 years old. So we're all fairly close in age.
Wow.
My older brother and I are just 18 months apart. So yeah, the babies came quick. So they just kind of like got into their thing. So
you're kind of raised in American Fork, Utah, which okay, and that's you describe American Fork for those who don't know Utah from.
American Fork is a small town, and it was smaller when I was living there than it is now. I feel like there's been quite a bit of growth, but
it's between Provo and Salt Lake, south of Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Kind of near Pleasant Grove and Geneva Steel, right?
Yep. Yeah, our city days were called the steel days because of the steel plant that was right there. So yeah, I feel like it was just kind of like a typical small town, but predominantly white. And so when I was in high school, there was, a brother, sister that were Vietnamese, and then there were me and my siblings. And I believe there was one black family that had like 2 kids that were, that went to my high school. But I mean, this is an extremely, extremely white community. It's just very homogenous.
Did you pass, being multiracial yourself, did you pass as white?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I always refer to myself as ethnically ambiguous because I I can be white passing, and there's privilege that goes with that when you're multiracial, is that you can blend in if you want to. But I also feel like there were certain experiences where I definitely also felt othered or put in a different category. And, there was things even in, like elementary school. I remember there were some kids that like dressed up for Halloween as like Japanese tourists, or there were kids that like
they had cameras?
Yeah. And, and just like kind of imitating like accents. And there was always kids that were like pulling their eyes to do the slanted eyes. And I don't know what it was about the 80s, but do you remember everybody was saying like jokes about Polish people? Yeah. They'd be like, there's a Chinese man and a Polak and I don't know. I don't know what was going on, but so I feel like there was like these kind of racial jokes, and I honestly like don't know how the Polish got into it, but there was always like a Chinese person. And so I just felt like there was a lot of imitating of, Asian accents, which like my grandparents spoke with accented voices. And so I think there was plenty of things that kind of made me feel like I'm not really in this group, or I don't really feel like I'm a part of this. And I do look a little bit different. And I think was even, when I was younger, I think I even probably looked a little more Asian than I do now. And so I think that there was a lot of people saying like, what are you? And so, which I know that usually people are just curious about like, what's your ethnic identity? But it also sometimes doesn't feel very nice when people are saying like, what are you? What's going on with you? And so I think that there's almost kind of like microaggressions that you kind of experience, and you're just kind of like, oh, it doesn't feel good. And so I feel like it's obviously it's not the same as if you had grown up in a predominantly white community and you were black, or, like if you were Hispanic and you were a Spanish speaker, or, like, I think that there are a lot of things that can make your racial experience easier or harder. But I, at the same time, I feel like I also need to acknowledge that there were some difficult things, even as a white passing multiracial person, that kind of had to be navigated. And I think I was aware very young that there was a strong preference for white beauty standards. And I think this is still fairly prevalent in Utah, because this is so, it's just like, I use the word homogenous a lot, but it's a fairly homogenous place. Mm-hmm. And so I remember being really sad because I didn't have blonde hair, and my sister got a perm. This was the 80s, so like the permed hair was like all the rage. So my sister got a perm, so she had like really great frizzy 80s hair, and I wanted to have that hair too. And so my mom took me to get a perm, and I probably have the most Asian hair out of all of my sisters.
Just straight.
Yeah, it's just black, like straight as can be. So I went to get a perm, so I get the perm, and you can't wash it or whatever. And then I think within a day or two, it was just completely straight again. Like it just was just like this again. And I just was so sad, because I was like, my hair can't even be 80s. It can't even be like 80s permed. It was really sad. So yeah, so I think that was something I was very self-conscious of, is being aware that I wasn't the preferred beauty standard. And when I was growing up, we talk about representation right now, like how important it is to see yourself represented in, like our cultural narratives and the stories and, like the movies that are put out. And I never saw that until the movie Mulan came out. That's probably the first real like Asian main character movie that I ever saw, was Mulan. It came out when I was in high school.
Asian woman.
Yeah. And so I just, I feel like I grew up seeing myself as a sidekick, or like you're the quirky friend of the main character, and the main character is the one that gets the guy, but you're just kind of like the funny side person. And so, I feel like it's just a tricky thing to try to navigate being in that type of setting when you are just, if you're very different, it's very hard. And I think when you're a little different, it's also hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're certainly not going to be viewed by your ward and stake as like pioneer elite, because everyone can see that your dad's Japanese. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, they're not pioneer stock.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think that I really felt aware of, there may have been some of that in my ward. I became more aware of our low social standing in the church when my parents got divorced. So my parents get divorced when I'm 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they split up when I'm 10. And I feel like that was a real significant thing that made me really feel like we were sort of second class in the church. And it may have been, there may have been other like racial pieces to that I was unaware of. I'm not sure. My dad wasn't active. So, you know, he's the only person of color in our ward and he's not active. I don't know if people perceived him in a certain way because of that. But my parents get divorced when I'm 10 years old and it was absolutely devastating for me. So it was just so like it just shook up my whole world. It was just so hard. But after that, I really feel like our family became kind of like a charity project. And we were constantly told like, this is really sad because you don't have the priesthood in your home. You know, it just was always like, well, make sure that this family's doing okay because they don't have the priesthood in their home. And so I think that my mom being a single mom in the church really, it was really like it was really a status thing that affected us. And that, you know, then I'm a teenager. So I think I became aware of it too.
Did your dad leave or did he stick around?
He left. So so my parents got divorced. So I actually don't have like a well-developed relationship with my dad at all. So when he was at home, before my parents got divorced, I think I was kind of like always walking on eggshells around him. And I think my parents got together. This is like my assessment of them. I think they got together and they had different ideas about what their life was going to be. And my mom was just like, no, we're going to do the Mormon thing and we're going to have 8 kids and, you know, live in American Fork and just do that. And I think that very quickly my dad kind of phased out of whatever he was feeling from his mission and just didn't want the same thing. And so I think that he was not feling what our family was. And so
what was his profession?
So he worked as an engineer for Abbott.
Abbott Labs.
Yeah.
So pharma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
They do like medical things.
So chemical engineer?
So he actually, I don't think he has a bachelor's degree. So I think he was almost like an engineer tech, like he had done.
Like a mechanical engineer?
I think so.
It doesn't.
Yeah, I don't even know for sure. This is a good indication of like how well I know my dad.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, so he was gone a lot when he was at home. I think we kind of made ourselves scarce because it was tense when he was at home. And so, yeah, so my parents, so even though it was not a great situation, it was still devastating to me when my parents split up when I was 10. Just because that's all that you know and that's your normal. And so it really kind of like shook the foundation of, you know, what I thought my family was. So yeah, so my dad left. We probably, I've seen him maybe like, I had interacted with him a few times after that, like before I graduated from high school. Like one time he took me and my sister on a fishing trip. And then one time like me and my brother stayed at his apartment, but it was like years in between.
Did he move away?
He moved to Salt Lake. Huh. So he was like close by. He just wasn't feeling it.
He just kind of disappeared.
Kind of deserted him.
Yeah.
And
so I think
financially deserted him too, right?
I don't think he paid some child support, but I do not think that it was what he should have been paying. And my mom's pretty mellow, and I think she didn't want to cause any drama, and so she just
Did she get a job?
Yeah, my mom went back to school, and she became a nurse. And I don't know exactly how much, but I think that our ward helped pay for that. So that's a nice thing I'll give to the church.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is nice. I know that they paid our mortgage frequently during that time. And so then we were like a single parent family and 8 kids. Yeah.
Like when we're all struggling, processing a loss of faith, it's hard to want to give the church any credit. It's easy to want to be angry about everything. And of course, we're all taxed at 10% of our income for life. And so like, it's hard to even say, wow, that's neat that the church helped my family out. So that's all true. And I'm not sermonizing anyone. Yeah. But I don't want to just totally jump over the fact that like your mom's without a provider in the home and the church potentially helps put her through school and helps pay her mortgage while she gets an education to support her children. I guess I just
agree.
want to be fair and say that's a big deal.
I think so.
Yeah, I agree.
Not to preach at you.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to Mormon-splain you, but
yeah.
Whenever Larissa tells us stories about her childhood at our house, I always have to have the Kleenexes close by because they're always so sad.
Yeah.
They're always so sad.
Well, I think they're kind of extra sad for me too, because I'm incredibly sensitive. I grew up feeling very disconnected from, my caregivers. So I think that I even experienced these things more acutely than even some of my siblings did, because I just was very, very sensitive. So, and I actually think my family's like financial setting in the church, I think motivated me as an adult to think like, I'm going to be a giver. I'm never going to be a taker, because once we had to be takers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And so we were also I know that we were getting storehouse food.
Like welfare, food from the bishop's storehouse.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a weird, I have a lot of weird feelings around this, because in one way I do feel grateful, because I'm like, thank you, and they were able to help and we had food. It was also very embarrassing. And I remember like my friends coming over and being like, I hope nobody opens the cabinet and sees that we have like food with that Deseret, the little Deseret beehive symbol on it. And so it just was a really hard thing. And I have this really vivid memory of, so we were, I think more than once, we were the subject of like a sub for Santa. And I remember like Christmas morning, and I know I was 14 years old, and I opened a gift, and it was like a green striped shirt, which was actually really cute. And it was like a cute notebook with some like fun pens, that were, anyways. So I was just like, oh, this is really fun. And there was a little tag tucked in it that said 14-year-old girl. And so whoever had bought that had, like somebody had said like, will you get a gift for a 14-year-old girl? So I feel like when I think of this, there's just a lot of weird emotions, because I think how nice it is that there was somebody that went out and shopped for me, but there was also a lot of, shame or embarrassment. Like, why can't we just get it together? Why can't we be that family that can take care of themselves? And so somebody else has to do this. So it's a really kind of like confusing, complicated thing. But I do think when I became an adult, I was really like, no, I'm never going to take from the church. I'm always going to give. I'm going to be the one that is like, I'm going to be the one that like buys the thing. I'm not going to be a taker anymore. And in a way that is good, because you want to give back, but also I feel kind of sad for myself that I thought that I couldn't take,
Yeah.
Anyway.
And you had a triple strike, because you're biracial.
Yeah.
Divorced, family, and poor.
Yes.
Not fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was tough, and you'll kind of see this later. I think that my family dynamic and these things that I experienced, I think that it wasn't until I was maybe in college, but I started to really chase. I want to be accepted in the church. I want to be that person. I want to be that family that people think is so great in the ward. And I think that this heavily shapes my adult relationship with the church, because I did experience this thing of feeling second class in the church.
Yeah.
I have a question for you about, it feels like there's like a before divorce you on a level, and then an after divorce. And I'm curious particularly about like who you feel like you became in that half part, like during high school, how you coped, how you kind of mentioned how sensitive you were, how deeply you felt, this really changed world for you. What do you remember about you kind of after this? How would you describe yourself?
I don't know if I don't know how it really, I feel like, especially as a high schooler, I feel like I was a very, very damaged person. I just struggled. And I think when I was, one of my biggest, I think, issues when I was growing up is that, my mom was really stressed out, and, she's single parenting and she's got 8 kids. And I was extremely emotional, going through a lot of things, really heavily processing like the events that were happening around me. And so I definitely felt highly marginalized by my mom and by my family, because I mean, I heard so many times, like, quit being so sensitive, like, quit being dramatic, or like, you're making too big of a deal of it. And so I think that that was something that really I internalized, that like, like you don't matter. Like you need to like put a lid on it, because you're just causing trouble.
Like your emotions take up too much space.
Yeah.
They're too big.
Yes.
It makes everyone feel.
Yeah. And I feel like as an adult, I've had to kind of work through some resentment I have even towards my mom, because I feel like she really shut me down during this, post-divorce, when there was a lot of things going on. And then I have a high achieving older sister, and my mom kind of did the thing where she kind of like made my sister her best friend after the divorce. And so there was just a ton of focus on my sister, and she just was kind of like the person that always did the good thing. She was like the golden child of her family, of our family. And so so that combined with me feeling like, no, I'm being dramatic, or I'm taking up too much space, or like my personality is too much, or whatever. I think all of that made it really difficult for me to even, so I mean, I don't think I really worked through or processed any of what had happened when my parents got divorced. And so, I don't know. I think high school was a time for me where I was just like struggling and trying to find my place. And I had a boyfriend all the way through high school, and I definitely think I was looking for someone to connect with, a male that would accept me. I'm sure I had like abandonment issues and things. I didn't know that at the time, but I was definitely like looking and searching for, like, I need somebody to connect with. I need somebody who can understand or hear me. And I think I identified fairly early that I would not find that within my family, because I felt very, very marginalized.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is a place to go, but sometimes when you don't have a father in the home or in your life, and you do date as a young woman, maybe you would look to your boyfriend as being an even more critical part of your life. And then there's whatever things the church is teaching you, and that can become a source of potential guilt and shame. Like, where do you want to go next? I don't want to jump there. Yeah. But that does come to my mind.
Yeah. So I definitely like latched on to a boyfriend that I had one boyfriend all the way through high school. That's a long high school relationship. I don't think it was healthy at all. But clearly this is something that I was, I thought I needed this. And so it was probably a very weird codependent type of a thing. But yeah, and I feel like I was always very aware of my sexuality. So it's something that was present, that I was feeling, and that I was aware of. And
do you want to back up to talk about that starting earlier, or because we didn't even talk about like the Mormon culture in your family? What role the church played once your dad left in your family? Yeah,
so I think it was always kind of a little bit of a push and pull with my mom and my dad when they were together. And I don't remember tons of it. I know that, like we would try to do things and it wouldn't stick. But when my dad left, my mom went really hard with the church. And I think that she still is very, very devout. And so yeah, my mom went pretty hardcore at the church, and she had very, very, I think they were fairly traditional beliefs for that time. So, and she was kind of like in the Boyd K. Packer mindset, because I remember, like you hear things, and I always think that I was like a little bit of a budding feminist. And so I'm very sensitive to social justice issues. And so I remember, I don't know if we learned about, it doesn't seem like we would learn about the ERA at school, but somehow I became aware of the ERA, and I was like, why wouldn't the church back this? Because the church loves women, like they promote women. And so why would they not do this? And so my mom gave me the total, like, Phyllis Schlafly, like, talking points that were like, You know who Phyllis Schlafly is, right?
Oh yeah, Margie and I watched that documentary.
It's so good.
Well, not documentary, the dramatization.
And she almost like single-handedly.
American Woman,
Mrs. America.
Mrs. America.
It's so good.
Yeah, that is it. We'll put that in the show notes.
It's so good.
See Mrs. America.
That's with Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Among others. The cast is incredible.
Oh, it's
Mrs.
so good.
America.
No, so I've had multiple of my women's studies classes will talk about Phyllis Schlafly because she literally almost single-handedly like derailed the ERA. I mean, she was just
with the help of the Mormon Church.
Absolutely, yeah. And the evangelicals.
And the Catholics.
Yeah. Yeah, so but her talking points about it, like, it was like, oh, this is going to make it so that we can't have gendered bathrooms anymore, and so women, will not have any privacy, and then, our daughters will be drafted. So there was a lot of kind of like scare tactics that were used at the time.
Yeah, just to make it explicit, we can't have an equal rights amendment, which all it says is that women should be treated equally to men. We can't have that, or gendered bathrooms will disappear.
And everyone will be assaulted, apparently, in a bathroom. Yeah.
And no children will, everyone will turn gay. There'll be abortions everywhere, and society will crumble.
Yes. So my mom was she read me like the Phyllis Schlafly lines. And so she was very much like, this is what, I think this is how she was raised to believe. And so this is what I was taught at home. And I know that she, I think when I was starting to like understand like what feminism was, and, I was saying something about it, and my mom was like, she told me the thing that like the three things that are the biggest threat to the church are feminists, gays, and intellectuals, right? Is that a Boyd K. Packer line?
That is classic Boyd K. Packer.
That came into my home, so.
Okay, so your mom goes Boyd K. Packer.
Yeah, it was probably always in her, but she felt free to do that. So, but it was kind of interesting because I think there was some things that she could do to regulate us. Like my mom was hardcore about rated R movies, and even like PG-13. It was like you need, like, even as a teenager, it was like you need to ask before you even see a PG-13 movie. And if I said I couldn't even, like, everybody was saying like that sucks. Like I feel like that kind of came a thing in the 90s, and we weren't supposed to say suck. And so like if there was a swear word, it would have been like death at my house. And but she like let me hang out with my boyfriend all the time. So I don't really know. So I think maybe there were certain things that she felt like she could control. And then there were other things that maybe she was like, I can't manage that. She was working, I was kind of a latchkey high school kid. And so, so maybe she just felt like I can't deal with this. And so I just don't want to know. And so in some ways I was not very well regulated. And in some ways I feel like there were some strong standards at home.
Yeah. Okay. That's super helpful. I'm glad we covered that.
Okay, yeah.
Now let's circle back. You were starting to talk about being aware of your sexuality.
Yeah, so I think I always was aware. So when I was in high school, I don't think I was very active, but I didn't know that I was not very active. I just was kind of like going when I wanted to, and like sometimes I'd go to my boyfriend's ward with him because he's LDS, and so I was kind of floating around, and I wasn't super engaged with it. But I did go to seminary, and I did the young women's thing every now and again. I did not have a great experience in young women. I had a young women's present for a little while that I was like, she doesn't like me. I was like, I can tell she doesn't like me. And I don't know if she thought I was a little rough around the edges because I wasn't always there. I'm not sure, but I know she didn't like me, and I could feel it. And I think there were some other girls that would always like hang out at her house. And maybe she was one of those young women's leaders that kind of tries to be the girl's best friend. And maybe I wasn't as responsive to her in that way. And so I could tell she like wasn't feeling me, and it just didn't make me want to go to young women. So I kind of just would go here and there. I went to girls' camp a few times, but yeah, I feel like I was always fairly aware of my sexuality. And so I think that like when I was in I messed around with boys like fairly frequently because I think that was like a very natural thing for me to be like, yes, this is how I want to express myself. And if I want to like psychoanalyze myself, there might have been like me trying to get some type of like love or validation back. And so yeah, there was like fooling around with boys, and I had 2 weird bishops interviews, and the weirdest part about it is that I didn't know that it was weird until like last year.
No, like a few weeks ago. when we were talking about it.
I was like, you hear people that have these stories about bishops interviews, and I'm like, I always say, yeah, I never had a weird bishop's experience, or I never had a weird bishop's interview. And then I was telling Jeff this story the other day.
Tell us the story.
And he was kind of like, you don't think that's weird? So my bishop, when I was a teenager, to this day, I have good feelings about him. He was just like a super nice guy. Great guy.
Systems, not people.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think that I had been messing around with my boyfriend. So I go in to talk to him and tell him. And he's asking me very specific questions about what happened. And
meaning where were you?
Yes.
touched?
So it was what were you doing? And then did he touch your breast? And then it was did he touch under your bra or over your bra? I mean, it was very specific. And I'm just sitting there just answering these questions like it's normal. I feel like this is what's so strange, is that you're just yep, this is fine. This is normal.
You just become numb to it, right? I mean, really, this is
and you're told your whole life that this man was called of God to help you to become worthy or whatever. And so I just answered the questions, and I think that it might have been I didn't take the sacrament for a few weeks or something like that, and then I just moved on. But So that's that. And then another time I was with my boyfriend at his ward, and his bishop was like, I want to talk to you both while you're here, because he knew that we had been dating for most of high school. So we met with his bishop, and he was talking to us about it. And he's talking all about sex is great, but you just got to wait for the right time. But he's just really, I think he was really trying to be cool with the teenagers or whatever. But then he was asking specific questions about have you had oral sex? And so he's asking very explicit things. And at the time I was gross. I can't believe he's asking that, ew. And, but again, I didn't ID this as inappropriate, because I had always been told this is what they're doing, and they're called of God, and that's what they're supposed to do. And I always hear people that ID these things as inappropriate when they're younger. And I'm always kudos to you, because I feel I was just yeah, this, I need to confess, or I don't know. And so anyways, so I had those two bishops interviews, and I never thought a thing about it until I was just honestly talking about it recently. And Jeff was like, those aren't normal bishops.
They are normal, but they shouldn't be normal.
Yeah, they're not okay.
That shouldn't be a normal thing.
They're normal, but not okay. Yeah. Anyways.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So yeah, high school. So I was a dancer. So I grew up dancing. That was kind of my thing. I think that was part of maybe, I don't know if that plays into me being aware of my sexuality, but I was extremely comfortable in my body. And, I grew up wearing leotards. And so I did not have and modesty was not one of the things that my mom enforced with me. There were other things, but it was not. So I feel like I had a lot of comfort with my body. And I understood that I sometimes use my body as an instrument because I'm a dancer, and I use it, to be expressive. And so I think that I had general comfort with my body, and I felt comfortable wearing, tank tops and short shorts. And it was all just no, this is fine. I wear a leotard most of my day. And, we'd have concerts, and you'd have a quick costume change, and we'd just run off to the side and strip down and then put your new costume on. And so I mean, even to this day, I feel I just have a lot of openness about these are just bodies, there's a time they're sexual and there's a time that they're not. So that was me as a teenager, but I think that people probably made assumptions about me because of it, but I wasn't aware of it at that time. Once I get into college, I will become aware that other people are perceiving me in a certain way because of this. But in high school, I was no, this is fine. I feel great. And I would wear a dress to prom that had, spaghetti straps, because that was the style in the 90s. And I was this is fine. So,
okay.
Yeah, that was me in high school.
Okay. Anything else about your high school years before we move to college?
No, I do want to say this, because this is kind of a weird experience that I had. So, that ties into kind of my racial upbringing. So when I was, I bet I was maybe a preteen, I started to become aware of like the racial, that there had been the priesthood ban, on Black people, and had questions about it. It doesn't sit right with me. And so I had asked somebody who was in my life, I asked somebody about racial differences, because I was saying, this is how, like, you're telling me that this is how God has marked people, is with racial differences. And they said, yeah, like, it's not that way anymore, but that is how God has like managed people in the past. And I said, okay, well, what about Asians? Because Asians have slanted eyes. So, like we have, like, I mean, if you're a Northern Asian like me, then you have lighter skin, and there are Asians with darker skin. But, like we have very distinct, like Northern Asians have very distinct eyes. So I said, what about people with slanted eyes? And this person said, that probably also was a curse from God at some point. And so they identified that if there was racial differences, it probably came from a cursing, but we don't have record of it. Like maybe the record of it just got lost. We have the Book of Mormon. And I want to just say this because I feel like right now there's like such a, there's always, people are trying to say like, it's just skin. What's the thing that like the apologetics around the skin color?
It's not their skin, it's their countenance.
It wasn't really about skin color.
Yeah.
The curse was around the brightness of your countenance.
Right.
So when they said dark and loathsome, they meant spiritually dark and loathsome, not dark and loathsome skin, which is made up.
Yeah. And when I was growing up, that obviously there was no talk about that. Like it was very specifically like
it was skin.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody else would have ever thought about why Asians look different. Sometimes I feel like Asians are almost like the forgotten minority because they did assimilate well, and because they, most of them have lighter skin, and so it's kind of like what about Asians? But I don't think, because of what the rhetoric was around racial differences at that time, it was not a stretch for somebody to make that jump and say, oh, Asians also must have been cursed at one point, because why else would they have these like physical attributes that are, like specific to their race? So yeah, it was a thing. It was a thing. It was common. Yeah. I don't know that anybody else would have ever heard that or thought like, oh yeah, Asians were cursed, but somebody made that jump. And I think that the rhetoric around the time made that jump possible.
I remember stumbling on a document as a missionary that had these rings, and it was like blacks are the outer ring, and then it's like Pacific Islanders, and then it's like Native Americans, and then it's like Asians, and then it's Middle Easterners, and then and it was like, I don't know if it was Alvin Dyer, but like somebody wrote some essay on like the gradations of race and who was and of course whites were the most valiant in the pre-existence, and then it was like grades of lesser valiance until you reach the blacks, basically.
Right.
So you guys were better than
we were better than some. That's terrible. That is terrible.
I'm sorry. But I did that was a thing.
Yeah. I mean, there was no, I mean, it's kind of funny now because you hear so many apologetics about it, and I'm just like, that wasn't a thing. Like it wasn't a thing till just recently that, that we talk about like, oh, it wasn't a curse. It was like the curse was that they didn't have the priesthood, or that they were separated from God. The skin was a marking, right? Like that was a way to mark people, but the curse was something else. Like it was never discussed like that. It was never talked about like that.
If anybody knows how to find that document I'm referring to with the circles, I would love to do an episode on that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
seriously.
Yeah. Okay. So you start to have a bit of a racial awakening.
Yes.
And a mini feminist awakening.
Yes. Yeah. It was all brimming under the surface. Yeah. Okay. When I left high school. So I graduated from seminary, and I also got my young women medallion. So I did enough to do those things. And then, and then I graduated and I went to Weber State for school.
Okay. And what were you studying?
History.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I love history, and I actually really, really love ancient world history. So, so yeah, I love ancient civilizations, and I actually really love Bible history or Bible culture type things. And so, so I was doing history, and I went to Weber State. So.
Is Wildcats? Is that what they are? What's their mascot?
Yeah. Is that right? It's been a little while.
I always talk about Aggies because I went to Utah State or BYU, Cougars or the Utes.
Don't forget Weber State.
John goes straight for the mascot.
I do.
Weber State.
Damon Lillard went to Weber State, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right, Jeff?
Is that another basketball reference? So we got
He's like an all-star. Come on, Marty. He's an all-star.
That's right.
Portland Trailblazers. Anyway, sorry, I derailed us.
No, you're fine.
Anything else, Larissa, about your story before you meet Jeff?
Yeah. So I before I met Jeff is when I kind of had. So I had a rocky first semester at Weber State, and I hadn't been super active in high school, and so when I was in my first semester at Weber State, I was also just a little bit wild. So I was just kind of like doing my thing and having a great time or whatever. And I never like drank or did drugs or anything, but I was just kind of like not super into my classes and dating a lot and just kind of doing my thing. And so it just kind of, and then I had one bad relationship that was pretty toxic. And so after that first semester, I moved back to American Fork and I moved in with my grandparents. They had a basement apartment. So I moved in with my grandparents.
Now, which grandparents?
My mom's parents.
Okay.
So these are my white grandparents.
I didn't ask you, did your dad's parents stick around
yes.
where they were in your life?
Yeah, so I was really close to them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So even though you weren't close to your dad, you were close to your dad's parents.
And my sweet Japanese grandparents, they for a little bit, they almost like disowned my dad because they felt that he, like family is so important. And Japanese culture is very patriarchal. It has a very patriarchal history. And so it was really like, you are not doing your responsibilities. And they were devastated about it. So they were like so loving to my mom. And so I grew up very close to my Japanese grandparents.
Nice.
And actually, when I got married to Jeff, so my grandpa died when I was a senior in high school. But when I got married to Jeff, it was like my Japanese grandma's like, it was like her proudest day because you may not know this because you guys don't have Asian moms or grandmas, but Asian moms always want you to marry a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. That's the goal for like an Asian female.
That sounds like a stereotype.
It is a stereotype, but there's a backing to it, and I can say it because I'm now an Asian mom, so I understand this. But yeah, people will joke about like the Asian moms, like you can either be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, or a disappointment. Like those are the different categories. So when I got married to Jeff, like my Japanese grandma was just like, I just remember her like touching his arm, and she kept going, "He's a doctor." Sweet. Oh, she's like, he's a doctor. Do you remember that? Like she was just like,
Jeff, you were like, I feel so seen.
Yeah. She was like 4'11", and she'd always go, "He's so tall." She's like enamored by Jeff. So yeah, so I was close to my Japanese grandparents, but yeah, I moved in with my mom's parents. They had a basement apartment, so I moved in with them, kind of as a way to just kind of regroup and get my bearings around me. And I went to UVU for just one semester. So, and I had kind of had a funky semester, and you'll find out more as we go along, but I feel like I'm kind of like a jack of all trades, and I'm interested in a lot of things, and I'm always pursuing different things. So I had this idea at the time that I really wanted to work on an ambulance and get my EMT certification. So I was like, no, I'm really good in like stressful situations. And so I'll do this. So I signed up to do that, and I could do it through UVU. So I took like 2 classes, and then I had my EMT class. And when I went to sign up for my EMT class, they said, the person at the office was like, hey, they actually have to fill like a quota of women in the firefighter program. And so they were like, do you want to take Fire 1, like the first level of like firefighter certification, because if you do, they'll cover the cost of like your semester.
Ooh.
And so like there was a scholarship involved. Yeah, they were trying to like get more women interested. And so I was like, yeah. So I took like an English class, and I think I had a dance class at the time. And then I also had my EMT, and I had my firefighter 1 certification class. So I did this at UVU.
That's amazing.
It was pretty cool, yeah. So I did this at UVU, but yeah, so while I was there, I actually had this experience, and I was at home, and it was general conference weekend, and you know, my grandparents are like really devout, and so I think I turned on conference, and I was down in the basement apartment, so I was on my own, and I turned on conference, and I was kind of like cleaning up or doing something, and so I was kind of listening, and Richard G. Scott gave a talk, and I still remember, it's called The Path to Peace and Joy, and it really, really affected me, because he was talking about, you know, repentance and the atonement, and he said, like, if there are those of you, and you know, he like, I don't know, he would like use his hand, and you know, like kind of like really
stare into the
stare into the thing.
That screen.
It was like,
And also like,
you have fallen off the covenant path.
It was exactly like that. But somehow it like spoke to me at the time, because it was exactly, he was like, if you are someone who has found yourself, you know, like off the covenant path, then he said, you do not believe that you are going to be a second-class citizen in the church. Yeah. And he said, like, you can come back. And I had felt like I was a second-class citizen in the church. And so I was really moved by that. And I kind of feel like during that time anyways, I was like, am I living under my potential? You know, like, am I going to get myself in trouble? Or am I, you know, like, what am I doing with my life? And so I made decisions right then that I was like, no, I've got to like get this thing together. And the only way I knew to get it together, or to, you know, like this is the life, this is a good life, this is a life that is valuable and meaningful. The only way I knew how to do that was to go hard in the church. And so that semester for me was a real change, where I was like, no, I don't have to be a second-class citizen in the church. I really can like move past my upbringing and who I was, and I can be somebody in the only place that matters, which is the church. And I think this really influences who I become in the church and my journey of getting kind of like really, really roped into the I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah.
Or joining the covenant path.
Yes. Oh, I did it. Yes. Yeah. So it was a little rocky though. So I'm trying to think what's the best thing to, so I start getting into like, I'm going to be really churchy now. So I'm like going to my student ward now, and I'm just starting to do the things. And I also really wanted to be someone that was knowledgeable. And so then I start like reading my scriptures, and I'm also reading church books. And like during that time I had bought like some like doctrinal commentary that like Joseph Fielding McConkie wrote at BYU. So I was really like, no, I can be that person. I wasn't that person, but I could become that person. So this is kind of like the path that I was on. So I had one significant relationship in college before I met Jeff that was really hard for me. So I met this guy actually in my EMT class, and then he was also from. So we ended up both going back to Weber State after this, but his dad was a high up in the CES, so he worked like church office building, and was a CES guy, and just like they were like the family, and he's had many other like important responsibilities and callings since then also. But so we were dating, and I was so he's like a really, really good LDS guy. And so I really wanted to get married. And I mean, we wanted to get married to each other. It was very mutual, and we were like thought we had a great relationship, and it was all good. And as things like progressed and moved along, it was kind of like, should we pray about getting married? And he kind of like pulled this thing with me where he was like, I feel like the Spirit is telling me like that it's not right. So this is like devastating for me. But as we kind of like start to like hash this out and be like, well, what's going on? Like, I feel like things are going great, and like, what's going on? So his dad was like just this really like rigid church guy, and he did not think that I was like the right material to join the family. And so he just didn't, and I don't know exactly, I don't know which of the elements of my identity were not okay. I don't know if I don't think there was like a full racist issue.
At least not consciously.
Not conscious, but there might have been like, she's not exactly one of us, or like, she's not marriage material, or
that's right.
You know, like, so there was something, and I know he was
come from a divorce.
Well, I know he said
biracial.
He said to his son one time, he said, she comes from like a family of divorce, and so she's not going to know how to be in a functional relationship. And the ironic thing is that, you know, when I was talking to this guy I was dating, he was like, oh, my parents have like a really hard time because like his dad had always been in leadership. The mom's just struggling. She's got like a ton of kids. She's struggling. And then, you know, he said he had memories of being in like sacrament meeting when he was little. And, you know, his dad's just like staring up at like the pulpit, like, I'm going to listen, like I'm listening to the talks, but the mom's like wrangling like all the kids. And so it's interesting because, you know, like he believed that they had a more legitimate family because of who they were in the church, even though there was clearly dysfunction in that family as well. But, so yeah.
And we all know that Mormon families, white pioneer stock Utah Mormon families can be toxic, like super toxic, abusive, just like all families have problems. And so like to say that someone coming from a divorced family or a biracial family, it's bad thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
It's that bias for longevity.
Yeah.
No matter what, when it can be incredibly dysfunctional. Or,
yeah, absolutely. So then I had one, so we had we were in this like weird relationship where we would break up and then get back together. So at one point we had broken up, but I think that we were going to meet up one day and like get together or just talk or something. And it was in the summer. So it was the Provo parade was going on. And if you have you been to the Provo parade, like the 4th of July parade?
Actually I have, yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. It's really fun. And it's just huge. So I was like, let's meet up after the Provo parade or something. I don't know. And so I was kind of like wandering around, and I randomly ran into his dad because he had been there with his family, and then we were going to meet up after. So I ran into his dad, but not, the rest of the family wasn't there. So he was just kind of like, oh, hey. And I was like, hi. So we kind of exchanged pleasantries, and then I moved on. And then later I saw this guy that I had been dating, and I was like, oh, I ran into your dad. And he was like, oh, were you wearing that? Like the clothes that I was wearing. And I was literally wearing like shorter shorts, like, and maybe like a tank top. And I feel like I was just like, it was like one of the first times I was like, oh my gosh, am I trash? Like, am I just like, like what's going on? Like, so I was kind of like, oh my gosh, this is something else I need to do so that I can be a better person in the church, is I need to change the way that I dress, because obviously this is not something that is making me a good, worthy person.
Wow.
So anyways, we actually dated. We were kind of like off and on. It was tumultuous and then we were kind of off, and then Jeff and I met. So it was my relationship before Jeff and I were dating. So. And
God gave him the okay to marry her after we got engaged.
There was a little bit of drama after like Jeff and I were kind of serious. There was kind of like oh wait, I think the Spirit is telling me that like we
I was just misunderstanding
from this
Spirit.
other guy. Yeah, I was kind of like, okay, I'm done with this now. But anyways, so yeah, that was kind of a thing. I think that, again, this is another one of these things that made me really think like, if I can dress in a certain way and do certain things, then I will be more acceptable in the church, so.
Yeah. It's interesting because on a level that was, Jeff had his optimization kind of journey on a mission. and you're having yours in
Yeah.
your own way, and it's hitting you, I think, in ways that, you know, definitely with the appearance and
Yeah.
modesty thing, the way it hits more women, what you look like, what
Yes.
you, as opposed to, but you're both on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jeff, do we come back to kind of integrate your story back in? We last left you coming home from your mission as AP.
Do you want to share your EMT story?
Oh yeah. Okay, I had one experience, and I think this is valuable because I have recently reframed this experience. So I had a strong spiritual experience when I was doing my firefighter training. So when I was growing up, I kind of was somebody who, you know, even though I'm very sensitive, I don't feel like I was, you know, like people will talk about how they experience the Spirit, and I felt like I was not having experiences like that. And I thought it was because I just wasn't very righteous, right? And so by the time I was in college, I thought that I had not felt the Spirit. And it was probably my fault, you know, like I was like, yeah, I haven't felt that. I haven't had these experiences. And you always hear people stand up in sacrament meeting and they're telling these like really like miraculous stories or emotional things. And I was always like, I wish that I was the person that would have that experience, because that's how I equated it. It wasn't like, oh, that person's really kind of extra, and so they like, you know, like they're viewing their experiences that way. It was like, no, really special, righteous people have those experiences, and I've never had one of those experiences. So I had this experience when I was doing my firefighter training, and I think I made it into this experience. It was how I viewed it, because I needed to have one of these experiences so badly. So at the end, to pass your firefighter, to become a firefighter, you have to do, you know, like written tests, but you also have to do like physical agility tests. And I'm a female, and I'm also, especially when I was in college, I was like pretty small. And there was just a couple of women in the class. And then, you know, like there's these like tough men and you know, that are drawn to like this type of work. So I had to pass like the actual firefighter agility training to pass the class. And so I was just sick about it. I was like so stressed out. There's one section of it that's actually like confined spaces where you like go through this like trailer, and they've got like different like boxes and things in the way. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to crush that. I can like get through these like little spaces, but you have to do the whole thing with like an SCBA on your back. So like with your breathing tube, and you have to be wearing full gear. Wow. So I had to be wearing full gear and an oxygen tank on my back. And I had to do this whole thing that even without those things would have been like an extreme challenge for me. And I honestly believed like, I don't think I can do this. I haven't had a lot of physically taxing things happen to me in my life. And so I was like, there's just no way that I can do this. And so, and this is, I'm now at the point in my life where I'm like reading my scriptures and I'm being pretty churchy. So literally the night before, I'm just sick about this test, and I'm just like, should I be sick and go to the hospital? Like, should I fake my own death? Like, should I just like slip away? But so I'm reading my scriptures, and I read in Alma, and I think it's like Alma, I don't even remember anymore. Now it's probably like Alma 26, and it's when the sons of Mosiah meet up with Alma again after they've had their missions, and they're kind of like talking about like, this is amazing, and we're still like brothers in Christ, and we had so much success. And then one of them says like, hey, cool it, you're boasting. And I don't know who the speaker is, but they say like, no, I do not boast in myself. I only boast in Christ, because in Christ, we can do all things. So this is what I read, and I was like, no, I feel like this was meant for me, right? So I really was like, no, I can do this because I can do it through God, right? Like God will help me do this. So anyway, so I just go the next morning, and I'm going through my test, and it was so hard. It was like you have to like drag somebody, like you're taking somebody out of a building. So I do the whole thing, and at the end I have one task left, and it's you have to roll up the ladders that are really long, and you use a rope to extend them. So you've got to do this, and they have to go up and down several times. So I'm just dead. I'm like totally exhausted, and I'm just there. And so I'm just like doing these. And at that point I was like, okay, I really think I'm spent. Like I'm so close, but I don't think I can get to the end. And all my friends like that were in the fire class with me are like around me and they're like cheering me on and they're just like, no, you got this. Like, and it was just like, so it was like a great experience. So I'm just doing it and my arms are like kind of getting numb and weird, but I just did it. So I did it and I finished it. And the way that I framed this in my mind was like, no, I didn't do it. God did it. And so this like became a thing for me. And I was like, yes, now I have an experience that I can tell people so that they'll know that I can be spiritual too. Like God also will bless me with spiritual experiences. And it wasn't until, it's so sad because it wasn't until very recently, I brought this up again. I was just thinking about it one day and I was like talking to Jeff and I said, do you remember my fire story that I like used to tell all the time? And I said that this is so sad for me now to look at this because I was a girl who was, very insecure and I could have really have used that experience to say, no, you can do it. You did that. You did it. And like, that's a hard thing and you can do hard things. And part of the reason that you could do it is because your friends were around you and they were cheering you on. But instead I was like, no, I didn't do that. God did that. And so it's just so sad to me now to understand that like the way that we frame things or the narrative around our experiences actually even takes some of the empowerment away from ourselves. That's what happened to me in that experience is I wasn't like, yes, I can do hard things because I did that really, really hard physical thing that one time. It wasn't like that. It was like, yeah, I know I couldn't have done that. God did that for me. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's my fire story.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is almost to the point where we meet, where you and I meet, except. Oh, I guess, yeah. So I was an EFY counselor, but I guess that happened after you and I had met. So we can talk about that.
How'd you guys meet?
Yeah, should we go there?
Yeah. Unless there's something pre-meeting that's really important in your story.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I think that's it.
I had transferred up to the University of Utah. My plan was always to do medical school since I was like, I had seen a sports medicine doctor actually here in Salt Lake. Russ Toronto was his name, who was a primary care sports and non-surgical sports guy. And so that was always my goal. So I transferred to the University of Utah. Plan was to do medicine and got a job at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building at the hotel, at the restaurant up top, which was the garden. They had the roof, which was the like buffet, really super fancy. And then the garden was the one on the other side. And so I got a job there and was working, and the talk was the new girl that got hired by the Hotel Temple Square organization, which encapsulated all of the restaurants, the Lion House and the Inn at Temple Square. And so Larissa had been hired at the Inn at Temple Square, but had been trained at our restaurant, but never when I was there. And so I'm hearing about her and very interested in the things that I'm hearing, but I never run into Larissa. So one night I'm like, hey, I had friends over at her restaurant, and actually one of the people, his wife was working over there. So we're like, let's go over there after work and I can finally meet Larissa. So we go over there and she was not there. But the phone list was there that had her name, and they'd been telling me they were going to give me her phone number. And so I got Larissa's number off of the phone list and called her, which I realize now after Larissa's, it's a little creepy. It's a little creepy, but that's how we met. She didn't call me back for quite a while, by the way. I called her several times and she never called me back. But finally we went out on a date.
So we kind of almost were a blind date because Jeff called me before we had met or he had seen me or anything, but we had mutual friends. And yeah, at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, there's several restaurants, several things. And then the Inn at Temple Square I think it's gone now because I think they took it out when they did City Creek. But anyways, that had like the hotel and it also had a restaurant. But all of us like kind of would sometimes work at different things or we'd cover shifts. It was like the same computer system. So we all kind of knew each other. So our friends kind of like facilitated this. Yeah. And then Jeff got my phone number off the employee phone list, and then we ended up going out. Well, I went over after he wore me down a little bit. Then I went over after work one day. I walked over to the garden restaurant. And then we actually met in person and talked for a little bit, and then we went out.
So many of us were taught in Sunday school as Mormon kids growing up to have kind of a checklist of, I mean, we were, you know, it'd be
Yes.
12 or 14 or 16. And it's like, pull out a sheet of paper. Who do you want to marry and what are the criteria?
Yes.
And for a woman, it's what?
Return missionary.
Right?
Yeah.
Righteous priesthood holder.
Righteous priesthood holder.
And for a man, for a boy, it might be what?
A spiritual, someone who wants to be a homemaker, right? I think these are really, I mean, that's sad, but I think that is part of what we valued or looked for.
And I'm guessing your checklist didn't say divorced biracial person, right?
Yeah.
Who had a wayward college experience. Not to shame you, but I mean,
Yeah.
But he probably AP on the mission. That's certainly one that could have been on your checkbox.
Yeah.
So I guess were you thinking about your checkbox as you were dating each other? And how did you sync the prospective spouse with your checkboxes, if you want to share?
So I don't know. I mean, Jeff had a lot of things going for him, and I knew he was pre-med. And obviously
that's a checkbox.
It's a big thing. Yeah. You wish it wasn't, but it was, especially me coming from a fairly unstable situation and very financially unstable situation. And so, you know, I think Jeff represented for me like some level of security. And yeah, he had been AP and he was, you know, active and going hard in the church. And so, you know, I had kind of recently gone through this thing where I was like, no, I'm going to be that person. And so I feel like for me, as far as like the checklist, Jeff really like suited the checklist. I had other issues that we'll talk about maybe after this, but I don't know how did you get over your like?
Well, I mean, I didn't know about Larissa's little wild time, right? I mean, we did not.
Okay,
I
wasn't like that wild.
No, I know you weren't that wild, but I'm just saying.
I love the wild and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wayward,
right.
which is actually normative. It's very tame and normative.
That's so important to point that out. It really is, because what we call wild in the church
for
is
a Mormon girl.
I mean, is like,
which is like
I
was kind of like making out with a lot of boys.
But no, I think when Larissa and I met, she was really in that churchy zone. So I feel like we had a lot of great, you know, what I call spiritual talks, or the church. You know, the church was the base, and to me that was the most important thing. And so I felt like, as one of the leaders had said, that if the church is the base, then you can make anything work, right? I don't remember who said that, but one of them said
Kimball
it.
Two people who are dedicated to the church,
that are committed to the church, like you can make it work. So I think that was the thing to me that really excited me about Larissa, was that this is this beautiful girl who also is a very spiritual girl, and that was kind of enough for me to think. And we've talked about this. I mean, there may be some level of me feeling this, enjoying this power differential too, of her coming from a broken home. I think this is a very real thing, even though it's not conscious in me. I think it's a very real thing.
Sometimes I come from a divorced home. Whenever I use that term "broken home," I get a viewer or listener. Stop calling our home broken. You know,
It's
a good
point.
I'd never thought about that growing up, but some people don't like that term. Not to correct you, just
No, I agree.
But I feel like that's
how we view it.
It's how we view it, and I think it's only recently that people are saying like, no, it's a restructuring, or you know, like I think that it was always called a broken home when we were growing up. It was just like, oh, that's sad. They have a broken home.
And I remember dating girls at BYU thinking, well, that's going to be a debit on my checklist, but hopefully I could be super righteous and overcome.
Yeah.
I dated Jeffrey Holland's daughter, Mary, for a little bit.
Oh,
and I just remember thinking self-conscious about that. Like, that's not going to be viewed well, but I'll try and be righteous in other ways.
Yeah.
Hustle more.
Yeah.
Hustle more. Yeah.
That's funny. Jeff dated a girl before his mission, and she had dated
James E. Faust's grandson.
And her family, like,
and she was the youngest. Her dad was quite old. And man, that was the most important thing to him. I mean, he did not like me at all because she had dated and he had gone on a mission. So she was dating him. He left on a mission. I started dating her, and he just could not ever like me at all.
He wanted her to marry
Faust's
grandson.
So important to James E. Faust's grandson was
the Mormon royalty is a funny thing, but.
So that I think that kind of was the basis of our foundation for when we started dating, and as we do in Mormondom, things move fast. And Larissa had planned to go on a mission. Maybe you want to tell that.
Yeah.
story.
So because I was like in this mode of being like, I'm going to be that person in the church. I was like, I'm going to go on a mission, and my patriarchal blessing actually said that I would go on a mission. And so,
did you get a lineage?
I did. Yes.
Your mom helped you with that. With the assist from your mom, you got the lineage.
I did get a lineage. Yeah. I'm Ephraim. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm Ephraim. I'm saying it like it's a fact.
Like it's a thing.
I'm from the lineage of Ephraim. So, yeah. Oh my gosh. So I actually have kind of a weird relationship with my patriarchal blessing, because it was another thing when I was growing up that I was like, maybe this will help me to know I'm special. And then it was just very kind of run of the mill. And so, so then
what was the one comment in there?
I have one terrible part of my patriarchal blessing that says like, should you ever like go astray, just know that you can come back. And so I'm 14 and I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like I'm really like off the rails. And now I'm like, what was up with that patriarch? Was he just like being a jerk to me? I don't know.
Yeah, because everybody else gets like, you'll rise in the morning of the first resurrection.
Right? Yeah, mine was like, if you go astray, which you might.
It's like when you defile yourself,
literally
there will be a way.
That's literally what it was like.
If you happen to defile yourself,
So
mine was like, as you pursue righteousness, you will be crowned with glories.
Yeah, that's not what mine was saying. Mine was like, when you. So yeah, but mine did say that I would serve a mission. So, and I think there was kind of some vagueness to it was kind of saying like, at some point in your life, like you will have an opportunity to serve a full-time mission. So I'm going hard and I'm deciding to be way churchy. So I had gotten mission papers from my bishop. Never submitted them, but I had got them, and I was like, I'm going to go on a mission. I'm months away from being 21, which is how old girls had to be at the time. And so I was kind of like, I'm not going to worry about boys right now. I'm just going to hunker down, and then I'm going to go on a mission. And that's when I met Jeff. So Jeff and I, during our dating years, were in like a constant kind of like struggle. Because Jeff was 24, so that was old. He was getting to be old for a Mormon male.
Becoming a menace to society.
Almost, yeah. He was almost there. So he was like, I'm ready to get married.
Put a 24? Rush on this order.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah. Right. He was feeling it, and I'm 20 years old, and I was like, I don't know, and I really wanted to go on a mission, and I feel like this is important for me to prove myself or to know that I can be good enough. And so we just kind of like went back and forth. And Jeff pulled out a lot of like church quotes to me.
President Hinckley.
I was like,
Gordon Hinckley. I'm getting myself out of the habit. Maybe you remember this talk when he said, stake presidents, I'm coming to you because I don't know who else to go to tell them that they have too many girls and they don't have enough missions for all these girls. I think because they felt like they didn't have enough safe place. Do you remember this? This was in the 90s. It was when I got home from my mission. So I bet it was 96, 97. Oh, I'm sorry. No, 99, 2000-ish is when it would have been, right after my mission. And so I'm quoting her this, like trying to manipulate her to not go on a mission, which is so terrible. But this is what I learned on my mission.
It's funny. Mormon courtships are funny too, because like you can't wait 18 months for your girlfriend to go on a mission. It's too long. Like you could have met and gotten married to like eight other people at that time. Yeah. So it was kind of like, that's too long. And so it was just like a real thing. And we had this like experience that I feel like it is funny, but it's also a little a little bit toxic, where it just was hard to decide. I just was like so torn. So we prayed about it together. Like we're like, let's both just pray about it. Like we're together, but we're like praying separately about it. And we prayed, and like then I'm done, and I was kind of like, yeah, I don't really know. Like I just wasn't getting something. And Jeff,
but luckily I got a revelation.
Jeff was like, I feel like
it's gonna work out.
That's what he said. He didn't say. He just said, he goes, I feel like everything is gonna work out. And so, I on some level, like
I was the priesthood holder, so therefore
there are a lot of young Mormon women.
Yeah.
Who some guy's hot for them, and they pray, and like most people, don't get an answer. But then the guy says, well, I got the answer. I served a mission.
Yeah.
I'm a priesthood holder.
What do I know?
I got the answer, so you're good.
So you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry about it. God gave it to me.
It's so true.
That makes sense.
Like, lucky you. I got the revelation for you.
So convenient. It's really nice.
Joseph getting the revelation for Emma that she needed to practice polygamy.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Practice polygamy or you'll be condemned, says God. To Emma.
Don't shoot the messenger. Yeah.
So you had to do it. I mean, if he got the revelation, God's not going to lie to a former AP.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right. Yeah, of course.
We actually broke up for a little while. I don't remember if it was before that or after that.
It was probably after that. So we broke up for a little bit. So we also, there was a little bit of family issues when we were dating. So it could be that I'm very problematic. I'm not sure. But Jeff's family also didn't accept me very well.
Well, 4 sisters and a mom who's
Jeff's
extremely controlling, and I'm the golden child, was a setup for whoever I married was not going to be a simple, easy move. And it was not. No. And they, yes, I think my sisters would admit that now, that they were not very nice to Larissa. My mom certainly became aware, and it caused turmoil in our marriage for a long time.
Yeah.
To a point where I had to not talk to my mom for a couple of years at one point.
Whoa.
Yeah. And, I can imagine.
Yeah. And my mom and I never had the same relationship again, unfortunately, because I chose Larissa, and I was like, no, this is the way it has to be. And we moved away from medical school and never looked back, because we're like, oh my gosh, having space was really one of the best things that ever happened to us. But I'm jumping ahead. Yeah. So
we had kind of ID'd this though when we were dating, that there was some family issues. And so between that and the mission thing, it was kind of like, I don't know. So Jeff dumped me. Jeff broke up with me we were maybe apart for just a couple of weeks. But we got along great together. Like, we were a good pair, and I think that we were very, like, drawn to each other. So I can't remember. I think I was the one, because I really was going through this thing where I was like, am I missing an opportunity? If I don't do a mission, am I missing an opportunity? Will I not be who I want to be in the church if I don't serve a mission, if I don't have these experiences? And then also, it was really difficult to make this decision, because I was constantly praying to know, and I really felt like I didn't ever get any answers. And so I was like, how am I supposed to make this huge decision and never have any answers? It's just like too big. It just was like so much for me. But I do feel like when we broke up, I kind of was like trying to come to a place where I was like, no, I need to make this decision. I'm sure maybe God doesn't speak to me because he wants me to be accountable for this. And so I did kind of get to a place where I was like, I need to decide if I want to marry Jeff. Like, is this the person I want to get married to? And I honestly felt like it was a little early for me to get married. Mm-hmm. And now I feel like at this point in my life, I feel like it was a lot early. But even at the time, I was like, this is early and I'm not done with college. And but I thought, but he is the person that I want to marry. And so, like, should I just go for this and do this? So I was feeling like good enough, especially with the time that we had spent apart. So I think I called you, and I remember we went on a walk together, and we were kind of talking and hashing it out. And I was kind of like, I'm feeling better about letting go of the mission thing. We have to like talk about our family dynamics though. And I think that this was actually a really healthy thing that we did early, is that we identified it and we said, like, we have to go into our marriage knowing that, like, we're going to have to manage this, and also that we have to prioritize us as a couple first before, you know, and like, let's not talk to, like, don't talk to your mom if you and I get in a fight, or, you know, like we have to navigate this in a certain way. There were still so many issues that we dealt with, but I do think at that point it was really good for us to say, like, if we're going to do this together, we know that we have to be a unit and we have to be us. Like, it has to be about us first, and they have to be on the periphery. And I think that was enough for me to be like, yes, like, we're going to do this and we're going to get married. And so after that, we decided to get married.
That's so insightful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, it was a journey, but I mean, I do think it was good. And there's so many things when I look back at us dating, I feel like there's so many things that I'm like, oh, I can see that there was issues brewing there, or, you know, like the way that we kind of set up our lives, like that wasn't good. But I do think that was like kind of how we came to decide that we were going to get married and how we were going to navigate it. I do feel like that put us on a path of saying, like, it's like you and me, like, we're going to do this thing together. And I think you'll see how this plays out in our life and even in our faith transition as well.
Okay.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Okay. So you get married.
Well, so I was an EFY counselor that summer. So I had applied to be an EFY counselor, which is a highly coveted job. It's honestly, and I feel like that summer, even now with the lens I have now, when I look back on it, I'm like, it was such a great time. Like, it's the funnest atmosphere, and you're with so many fun people, and it was just a great time. And so I was hired probably before we met. It was maybe like in the fall, and then we had met that winter. So I knew I was going to EFY that summer, and that year I think they were trying this out, but they had something called performance counselors, and it was people who like had experience singing and dancing, and what they would do is they would teach you like all the music and the dances and stuff, and then they would send us to the like the regional EFYs. So I did one session at BYU that summer, and then I did, I think, like 6 straight sessions at Southern Virginia University, and it was all of the same counselors there. So we just, like, some of them are still like my close friends to this day. Like, we just had a really, really tight knit group of friends. And so I was at EFY, and EFY is the most sexually charged atmosphere, like, probably in the world, both because of the kids and the counselors. Like, it's just, there's like so many hormones going, and like these kids have not been around a ton of LDS people. So you've got the kids and their hormones are raging, but even the counselors, like, all the counselors are like really charismatic, and, you know, like, it was competitive to be it. And so I feel like just the whole atmosphere was just like, like, it's just, people are crazy. So the night before I flew to Virginia to do 6 weeks at EFY, Jeff proposed to me.
I had to do it before.
He had to.
I don't know if it would have happened.
He had to get a ring on it. So yeah, so Jeff proposed me right before EFY. So I spent the whole summer. So I did 6 weeks at Virginia, and then I did 1 in Kentucky, and then I came back, and I think I did 1 more session at BYU, and then it was the end of the summer, and then we got married in September. So we didn't even spend our engagement together because I was at EFY that whole summer.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, but it was a great experience. I mean, I know that, like, there were things that we taught. There was one day that we would separate the boys from the girls, and the boys had like a pre-mission talk, and the girls, we talked to them about modesty. I don't know why those two things were comparable, but so there were problematic things that I participated in at EFY, but I still feel like
serve missions, girls are modest.
Yeah, that's right. Girls, cover yourselves. Yeah.
Let's talk about how you dress.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I know that I sent girls back to their rooms because we were checking like hemlines and things like that. So there's things that I'm not proud of or happy with that I participated, but I still feel like overwhelmingly it was a very happy experience for me. And it's something that I wanted for my kids. I had kind of like been the whole time we had kids, I was like, I can't wait for you guys to go to EFY. So anyways, yeah, it was a good summer. So while I was at EFY also, because I was teaching modesty, and I had these issues where I had not dressed modestly and felt like I was judged for it. So I had decided that summer, I was like, I'm going to dress as if I wear garments. So I didn't wear temple garments yet, but this is just like how hardcore I was being. I was like, I'm going to show God that I'm, you know, like I'm preparing for the temple, and I understand this principle, and I'm teaching it to the girls. So even though it was in the summer and it was like Virginia, it was so hot, but I was like, I'm going to dress as if I wear garments. Which means shorts down to your knee, which is terrible. And then no tank top, you know, like shoulders covered. Yeah. Nothing, no midriff showing. And,
no tight fitting clothes.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like that was like where I completed my, like my intense arc before Jeff and I got married. So
do you want to talk about your wedding or your marriage?
What do we want to say?
Is there anything we don't have to dig into it. Like,
there's not
what
so
was
much
important to your story?
Except going to the temple the first time. Obviously Jeff was already endowed because he had gone before his mission. So Jeff was with me when I went to the temple the first time. And you know, like if you get married, if you get endowed right before you get married, you know, a lot of times your fiance will be there and they'll like take you through the veil, which if people don't know the temple, they won't know. Anyway, so Jeff did that. So Jeff was with me when I was endowed, and I kind of feel like I had a funny relationship with my first temple experience because I loved history and I loved ancient civilizations. I think I really understood that there was a long history of communities using ritual as a way to create community and to bond, and it was rites of passage. So I actually was totally like fine with the temple. And I was endowed at a time where you were wearing the
shield,
the poncho that was open on the sides. But again, I'm just like fine with my body, and I've learned about like these rituals and rites of passage. And so I was just like, yeah, this is fine. Everything's like normal. And I'm sad that I wasn't like, oh, this is not okay, or like nobody talked to me about this, so this isn't fully consensual. Like none of that was even a thing for me. And I wish that I had the presence of mind and the education to know what wasn't okay about it, but it did not hit me at the time. I was like, this is great. And my mom was there, and her parents are there, and my siblings are there. And this is a family that I had felt very marginalized from in my life. And they're all there, and my mom's crying. And so I felt extremely validated in the temple. Like, I'm finally going to be the daughter that like gets the attention, or I'm finally going to be the one that it can be about me now. Like, I can be important now because I did the thing that is making my mom cry in the temple. And so yeah, that's it. I did not ID anything weird in the temple, which is weird. But yeah, I was like, this is great, sure. So yeah.
All right.
And then we got married.
Yeah. How was it for you, Jeff, getting married, all that?
Yeah, so it was funny because our first year of marriage, I feel like it was pretty easy. I felt like it was like pretty easy. I think we had this talk at one point where she's like, this is really hard. And I'm like, oh, I like thought it was really easy. so we're experiencing
different,
totally separate things. And this became a theme for, I think, our marriage for a long time, because, you know, the thing that we don't realize in the church is you're chasing, at least in our situation, which I know is probably more norm, is you go after what the man is going to do, right? So my goal is to go to medical school. So we never had a talk like, hey, is Larissa going to finish school? Is Larissa going to like do something? Is Larissa going to like, what about her? The discussion was only about where I get into medical school. That's where we're going to go. And literally we never had this talk, and we never had that talk for years, right?
Yeah.
And didn't realize like what was brewing because of this, because that does not, it doesn't bode well for anybody to be in that kind of a situation. And I think it's rampant in the church that this is the norm, that you do it for the men because he's going to be the breadwinner, and the wife is, the second tier because the most important thing for her is to be at home with the kids. And that was almost the expectation in our marriage, even though we never had even the conversation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was nothing we ever had an agreement plan about or a discussion about. It was just the understood, which is really strange. And, but again, the church, that's the church's, whatever, that's what they had ingrained in us to do.
Those roles are the default.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think that this is changing some. Like I think if you talk to Gen Z BYU students, female students right now, I would say that they probably have a different take. But we were raised in where they were saying don't put your kids in daycare because you don't want someone else raising your kids. And, you can get educated because that will help you be a good mom. But in the end, you need to support your husband. I had heavy messaging like that when I was growing up in the 80s that unless you absolutely have to work, you should not be working. It's selfish. And so I don't think that we kind of accepted this role that was kind of given to us. And it wasn't till many years later that we had to say I don't know that I chose this. This was something given to me, but I don't think that I chose, and I definitely don't choose it anymore. But that kind of was what we settled into.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think Margie and I had a similar experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of coming to the end of this first part.
Yeah.
So what other parts of your stories do you want to take us up through before we kind of wrap up this part in preparation for when the things start to get tense?
Yeah, things get Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else.
Let me ask.
Yeah.
You both have identified sexual dysfunction as a major theme.
Yes.
For your story. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about?
No, because at this point, this was, I think, we had not recognized. I mean, this had not become an issue yet.
Okay.
So I think it's better to
keep with
kind
the
of delve into
timeline.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we got married, this is one of the fun things about getting married really young is that you don't even know how to have we didn't have conversations about this. We had very, very little to none sexual education. And so, a lot of LDS people, and I don't think this is just LDS people, for a long time, our parents, just their generation, didn't talk about sex. Their parents didn't talk to them about sex. And so I think in general, a lot of us entered into marital situations with very little information. And so I think that will come to play out in a lot of different ways. But we didn't have conversations about it. I don't think we had the language or the understanding to know, let's talk about this, or let's hear about what your belief is on this, or anything, or what has been your experience. We just got married and then did the thing. But
okay, where'd you go to med school?
To ATSU. It's in Kirksville, Missouri. So Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine. The mother school is AT Still University of Health Sciences.
Okay.
So
Cody
and Leah Young actually went. They were there with us.
Yeah, Cody and Leah were in our ward when we went there.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's where Cody went to med school?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Shout out to Cody and Leah. We love you guys.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Fun.
yeah, they were in our ward for just a year, and then they went somewhere for third and fourth year rotations, and then.
Do they know you're here today?
No, and
They're about to.
We don't.
I already texted Patrick Mason.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. They were with the
Patrick
Masons.
was at our ward. Yeah. When the Mormon world is a small world, and I think when you've moved around like us, then you kind of are like, oh yeah, we know those people, and those people are in our ward. So yeah, there's a few people that we've connected with.
Okay, so maybe to close, I want to set it up. So you enter marriage, you're going to med school, you've checked off all the boxes. How did you envision the rest of your life playing out? What are the...
Yeah, that's such a good question.
That'll be the setup for the tension for part 2.
I think we both envisioned, me being a sports medicine doctor, Larissa bringing up our righteous kids, and us having a very structured and you know, the things that our parents didn't do with family home evening and scripture study and
things.
prayer. We're gonna like, our kids were gonna be spiritual giants. We were gonna go on missions after and
fulfill the patriarchal
be a
blessing.
mission president.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was one of my things. I was like, if I'm not going to go on a mission, we're going to go on missions when we're older. So like, I think that we were both fairly like committed to this thing that like, we're going to do this. And being a stay-at-home mom was the only option that had ever been presented to me. So I was fully like, yeah, he'll go to school and I'll support him. And then I'll have the kids.
Your kids would be born how?
Yes.
Biologically, right?
yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was the thought. Yeah, is that I would get pregnant and then yeah. So yeah, I feel like at that point we were just like, okay, let's do our thing.
And then eventually Jeff would become an apostle, right? Right?
He still might. We don't know.
But definitely serving bishoprics and stake presidencies and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that was the assumption.
And I think our goal, I mean, when you say goal, you know, you would never like say this as a goal, but to be a mission president is like, that would be, you know, you think that would
Jeff, so Jeff was really close with his mission president and his wife, and we got together with them several times. And they've actually both passed now, and they were just really special people. But his mission mom, I was talking to her one time, and she said, "I know Jeff's going to be a mission president someday." Like she just felt like this. And now it's kind of funny to think about that because I almost am like, yeah, he seems like the type, but it's mostly just because he's a doctor and he's a white male that is successful in life. Like, what does it take to be a mission president? But she told me that, and I kind of was like, wow, like, yes, maybe someday Jeff will be a mission president. But anyways, yeah, we were on the path though.
Love it. Okay, well, that's so stay tuned for part 2 where you'll find
when
out
it all falls apart.
what happens to the Mormon story. All right, well, thanks for joining us for part 2. Thanks so much, Jeff and Larissa, for sharing your wonderful story so far. And Margie, it's so great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, babe.
Yeah. All right. Come back soon for part 2 of Jeff and Larissa's story, where we'll be talking about fertility issues, multiracial adoption, sexual dysfunction, breast cancer.
It's going to be a roller coaster.
Faith journey stuff.
Faith crisis, yes.
All sorts of important and interesting themes in your Mormon story.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you back for part 2 of Jeff and Larissa's story.